Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Welcome to this episode of Alien Lizard Humanoids. Tonight we'll be looking at the famous case, or perhaps notorious case, of Betty and Barney Hill. I'm here with my co-host. We'll go through some brief introductions. I'll start with Jeff. How you doing, Jeff?
Very good. Yeah, how are you?
I'm doing well. Tell us about yourself.
My name is Jeff Pinson. I am a licensed clinical mental health counselor. I specialize in OCD treatment using exposure and response prevention therapy, as well as body-focused repetitive behaviors. I'm glad to be here tonight to talk about alien lizard humanoids.
Very good. So you're a mental health counselor. What would you have wanted to do if you could have picked another occupation?
Well, my true calling in life, right? What I really wanted to do, like since I was born, really, was to be a hypnotist. I mean, in terms of things that have loads of research to back them up, things that really make a lot of sense, things that everyone believes are really, really useful. That's it. I can't think of anything that has more research behind it.
Stage hypnotist or like hypnotherapist?
Either. Both?
Okay.
Same time?
Both,
I don't know.
Yeah, why not do
Like,
both?
do the same thing
At the same time. I mean, anything would have gone, right? You can be a hypnotist. You can go anywhere, as far as I'm concerned. So, but as fate would have it, I became a mental health counselor, and I had to settle.
Yeah, that is a disappointment.
It's a tough break.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Settle for that.
Tough story.
Yeah.
Yeah, hypnotist almost had the dream. You're right there.
So close. But I just had to settle. It was terrible.
Yeah. Well, you can't always get what you want, right?
That's true. That's true.
But if you try sometimes.
That's right. That's right.
I'm
Get
glad
what
you
you
guys
need.
are making music references, too. That's good.
I listen to music.
I just had to vary it with the movie references. I got to have something else there, too.
All right, Mike, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty well.
Tell us about yourself.
My name is Mike Smith. I'm a licensed professional counselor in the state of Delaware. I'm a specialist in narrative therapy and geek therapy. Really trying to get set up with a therapeutic D&D game to help people who with social skills and anxiety issues in the near future.
Oh, very good. So another mental health counselor, what would you have wanted to do if you had a different career you could have chosen?
Oh, when I was a kid, I wanted to be in the Air Force.
Oh,
Movies like Top Gun or my favorite, Iron Eagle.
Iron Eagle
was my favorite.
too, right?
Oh yeah. Well, Iron Eagle 3 was iconic. But the first one was great, and I loved it. And I really wanted to be in the Air Force. But unfortunately, when I got to high school, I met with a Air Force ROTC officer. Mm-hmm. He said, "What do you want to do in the Air Force?" And I was like, "I want to be a fighter pilot." And he said, "You're too tall." I'm like, what? I'm like 13 years old. I'm like 5'5". I'm like, I'm not too tall for anything yet.
Wow,
And he said, by the time you get to the point where you'd be in the military, you'll be over 6 feet. And the cockpits of the fighter planes are set up so you have to be under 5'7" at the time.
Wow.
Because they're so cramped and tight. So he just popped and burst my bubble. I was just like, oh, it was sad. And I look back and I go, I should have gone that way because they had all sorts of toys to play with. All sorts of amazing technology to develop and have fun with. I love video games. I would have loved to have been piloting drones, sitting in an air-conditioned office, joystick.
You're not too tall to pilot a drone, right?
No, I'm not.
Unless you have to sit in it, then I guess you have to be pretty small.
Really small for that. Really small. But instead I ended up becoming a mental health counselor.
Oh,
Sorry, Mike.
another disappointment there.
Really sorry about that.
Yeah.
Oh.
Perhaps you could have gone the direction of the movie. What's the spoof movie? I just lost the name.
Hot Shots?
Hot Shots, thank you. Yeah, maybe you could have gone the direction of that.
And more Hot Shots Part Due.
Yeah.
Another underrated motion picture.
That was definitely a franchise that should have gotten more movies.
Yeah. But, I mean, maybe Charlie Sheen had a good time.
Yeah, I think he kind of disintegrated after that, right?
Yep.
He disintegrated multiple times after that.
Was he the one who said something
Tiger
about
blood and Adonis DNA? Yeah.
There's something he did. Was his had a phrase like "by winning"? Was that Charlie Sheen?
It's just winning. Just winning.
Oh, just winning.
Yeah, I think that was.
Okay.
I think that came back to him.
I thought it was like by winning, like he was winning no matter what, like both ways or something. When he was losing, he was winning. I don't know, but yeah, I don't think he always won. So yeah, great movie, Hot Shots, and the sequel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you, Dr. Grande? Sorry to interrupt you.
In terms of career,
Yeah.
I think postal worker,
Oh, yeah.
if not counselor,
Mail,
postal worker.
mail carrier?
They have a lot of job stability. Tremendous. Matter of fact, that's really all they negotiate in their contract is job stability. And then there's this phenomenon you hear about sometimes, going postal, which sounds interesting.
That could be a fun way of relieving stress, I suppose. You only get to do it once.
Sounds very safe. Going postal. Yeah. Well,
Going postal.
That creates job security for mental health counselors.
It does.
So
It does.
you could have been, but you had to settle for mental health counselors. So
Just
Yeah.
skip the middleman, apparently.
It's interesting because there was some studies, or I don't know if they were peer reviewed, but there was research done about postal workers that said that the reason they would go postal, which of course is actually a dangerous thing that they did for, I think, a time in the 80s and 90s it was popular, was because the post office had like terrible requirements for promoting people. If you had a college degree, you were a supervisor or manager. But just because you have a college degree doesn't really mean anything in terms of what you could do with the post office. It's a pretty regimented system. You just follow the system. And usually seniority is a better criterion for that, for supervision. And there's people there for 30 years, 20 years, and they're getting passed up by somebody right out of school. And it was too much to bear
Wow.
for some of them. Yeah. Yep. Very sad. So, yeah, on that note, let's take a look at the case of Betty and Barney Hill. So this case at first, like so many, just with the name, you might not think it's that significant. These two people in New Hampshire, they were married, kind of coming up with a story. But this is actually like doctrine in the UFO community. Like people are interested in UFOs. Like these two, Betty and Barney Hill, I would argue right up there with like Bob Lazar. And I think it was Travis Walton. They're right up there. Like they're legends.
Yeah.
And their story has inspired all kinds of other kind of UFO folklore. And it's very popular, I guess, at the conventions they have, like the Betty and Barney Hill. Like if you don't know that, you're not a real UFO chaser or whatever you can be.
Enthusiast or
Yeah,
something.
enthusiast.
It's interesting when we talk about that. When we call it the Betty and Barney Hill case, it does have that kind of innocuous feel to it. But there are other titles that have been given to it, like the Zeta Reticuli incident.
Like that sounds really intense.
Right? Like the interrupted journey. Like, wow, it's crazy. The White Mountain incident, White Mountain abduction. Like all sorts of different names for it that have a lot more, some of them sinister undertones to them. But when we get down to and say the Hill abduction or Betty and Barney.
Yeah. This couple driving around.
When you say Betty and Barney,
Rubble.
right? I mean, you think of that, and you're like, "Oh, that doesn't sound
No, it's
that
Hill.
intense."
It's Hill.
Well, yeah, no, but like when you say it, it's Betty and Barney, and you're like, "Oh, that doesn't sound that intense," But much to your point.
So the abduction, that we'll get into the details of it, but the abduction they claimed occurred, it's important to remember it was in 1961, September of 61. It occurred September 19 into September 20. And this was a time, we've talked about this before, I think, when not everything was invented like now. Seems like every good idea has occurred many times in 2021, like in the age we live in this time. But in 1961, there was a lot of things that weren't invented. And
60 years of invention.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big deal.
It is.
Yeah. And also, I think it'll become relevant, is mental health treatment back then was extremely primitive compared to how it is now.
Right.
And it was largely based on psychoanalytic thought, not so much psychodynamic, which is still a popular modality now, but psychoanalytic, which was pretty much the way it was interpreted by many professionals was, I can make up anything I want. Freud did, so I'm going to as well. And you had essentially these clinicians out there, and we'll get to one, Simon, I believe, right?
Right.
Benjamin Simon.
Benjamin Simon. You have these clinicians that became like little institutions in their own right, where each one had their own novel set of theories instead of following any type of doctrine or canon. Like most of them ignored Freud, but took some of the unconscious mind and, of course, the psychosexual stages and said, well, I'm going to build whatever I feel like around it. It was very loose science. I wouldn't even call it science.
I'm kind of in favor of ignoring Freud too, but That
Well,
I have
Freud-
other things that I
was
fill it
a
in that
genius.
actually has.
Freud was a genius. He had nothing to go on when he invented all those theories.
Yeah.
So for the first guy to ever say, I'm going to try to figure this out, Freud was incredible, but he really overcommitted to some ridiculous ideas. And I think that's what got him in trouble.
Right. I mean, prior to Freud, every university in the world said the human mind cannot be studied scientifically. It must be studied. It's the realm of philosophy. Philosophers study the mind. It cannot be studied scientifically. And Freud said, "Hold my beer." And
Yeah,
he did. He went
yeah.
and studied it scientifically, primarily using case studies.
Yeah, I think in a sense he proved them right and proved them wrong at different points in his career. But no doubt in the end, he had come up with a fundamentally ridiculous idea that still cannot be proven scientifically. But some of the ideas, some of the parts of his theory, like the idea that behavior follows a pattern that looks like unconscious desires, and the whole idea of stages exist, not necessarily his stages,
Right.
but that stages exist, like Eric Erikson later on, who was a neo-Freudian himself, would come up with a much cleaner model that you can actually apply in counseling.
Yeah.
And then there's some of the things about the id-driven things that are actually biological urges, like cravings for food, air, water, which moves into drug cravings and things like that. Same mechanism. We find that that's actually a biological thing, but that would have fit into Freud's id model.
Absolutely. I think, too, even though Freud may not agree, I think he kind of demonstrated that behavior is purposive as well. Like people do things for a reason. He would say from unconscious drives, from unresolved sexual conflicts, blah, blah, blah. But, I mean, he still touched on something very real there, that when somebody does something, when they say something, it means something. He just didn't know what it meant, really. But that's something that's very important. And we see that even, with Carl Rogers and Albert Bandura, who died recently. Sadly, I think in his 90s.
Yeah.
The forgotten theorist, one of the great theorists, the Bobo doll guy. Or Bobo or Bozo? Or
Bobo. It was
Bobo, yeah.
It was the Bobo doll.
It was like an inflatable.
Yeah, it was, and one of those inflatable bouncy things, like weighted on the bottom, so you punch it and it falls over and comes back up.
Yeah. Who would have thought that introducing violence to kids would be a great experiment?
Freud was really able to create kind of the starting point for a lot of people and go off of something, like you said, kind of created something out of largely nothing. So a lot of good people were able to come after that, thanks to Freud, and really changed a lot of his ideas. But yeah.
Freud was kind of like the Wright brothers of psychology. I mean, he did the first science part of it and got it off the ground, but he's not Boeing.
Right.
He's not creating 747s.
Yeah, it was far from a SR-71 Blackbird. But yeah, I think that, every early theorist either loved Freud and defined themselves that way, or hated him and defined themselves that way.
Or like Jung, had both.
Right.
Started out loving him and then hated him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Learned everything he knew from him and then went, I don't like your stuff. I'm making my own stuff up.
Yeah, I think I think that's actually kind of a pattern that we see with Freud, where people really were enthralled with him in the beginning, but then when you got to know him as a person, he had a dark side. And then, of course, Carl Gustav Jung, I believe, went off and created his own theory that was arguably equally as ridiculous.
I do still appreciate Freud for the apocryphal. I think it's apocryphal. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Because he was all about that dream analysis. Like a cigar is a cylindrical, long object. Like it could be meaningful in psychosexual ways, or it could just be a cigar.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the defense mechanisms, even though many researchers hate the idea of them because you can't prove them, they seem to explain a lot. We can't prove them, but they fit.
Yeah.
Pretty much all of them fit at some level: sublimation, rationalization, intellectualization. I think it's repression was the central. That was his central theory, that everything basically is repressed, and then everything else, all the other defense mechanisms, are a version of that.
Which is actually a huge part of this case.
Right, repressed memories.
Repressed memories.
Yeah, so-called.
Yeah.
So-called repressed.
So-called repressed memories. Yeah.
Now, if I had become a hypnotist, I would have been able to get those repressed memories out.
Well, maybe. There's a lot of debate on that one. Well, not even so much debate, but there's a lot of evidence that that's not a thing.
First,
we'll talk about that.
First, you have to compress them. You have to put them in there and then expand them. It's a very complex process, and objectively silly, as we'll see through the Betty and Barney Hill.
We just needed to get you a pocket watch.
Yeah,
Getting very
so people can see sleepy.
Right.
You're getting sleepy.
Maybe we could demonstrate here. Maybe just one of you guys want to be hypnotized. I'm no expert, I have no experience, but you want to be hypnotized?
I believe that would be unethical. Yeah.
The highest level of expression for hypnotist is making people act like chickens.
You're right. You're right. And now I'll clap, and you're a chicken.
All right. So we see here a little bit of background on the Hills. So Betty Hill was white, and Barney Hill was black. Betty Hill was married before she met Barney. She divorced because her husband had a girlfriend. Always a disappointment in a marriage, typically. She went back to college.
Yeah, typically, but not always.
Right, yeah, typically, yeah.
There's some relationships out there where like, oh, you have a girlfriend? Thank goodness.
Yeah, back in 1961, the cultural norm would have been girlfriends in a marriage bad.
Yeah.
Right, mistress bad.
In general, yes. And again, I think that depends on the culture. Like some of the higher end areas, they might be expected,
Yeah.
in the higher socioeconomic standard.
Among the elites.
Yeah, amongst the elite elites, it's like, we expect this to happen. Just keep it out of the press.
Right.
Well,
discretion.
it's cultural norms. It's a mixed race couple, in the 60s and late 50s. I'm sure they started dating then. So that was largely, obviously not everywhere. We see that her family, I think it was her family, was okay with it and supportive. But from my understanding, I wasn't alive, but that it would have been largely frowned upon, looked down upon at that time.
Yeah, they would have experienced a lot of flack in the community for that. And I think they did, even though they responded well to it. It did happen.
From what I've heard from their reports was that the neighborhood that they lived in was actually pretty accepting of it too. Like everybody kind of was good, but
Traveling.
Barney Barney worked an hour away from where he lived. So there was very little overlap between the professional lives. And because Betty was a social worker,
Right.
If she worked in the community, with Barney working so far away, most people wouldn't have known that about her, out in the general community. So it wouldn't have had as big an impact as it might have if it was a hugely public couple.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, they definitely would have experienced racism.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
In 1961, intense. Intense level. So Betty Hill was born in New Hampshire. Barney was from Virginia. So again, she divorced. She went back to college, became a social worker. Barney dropped out of high school and went to the Army. So at this point, they have separate lives. He served there for 3 years. He married during that time, and he lost all his teeth in a hand grenade accident, which sounds very dangerous.
Yeah.
Now
they show in the movies all the time. You kind of grab the pin with you. You're not supposed to do that.
It's a bad idea.
They don't come out that easy.
No.
Plus, I guess if the spoon flicks off really fast, it could whack you right across the face.
Yeah. I don't know what the mechanics were of the accident, but anything that could take all your teeth out, and any hand grenade explosion that could take your teeth out, could probably take your head off too, right? Like it seems dangerous.
I'm guessing it wasn't an exploded hand grenade, but those things are pretty solid.
Maybe hit with one.
If he was hit in the face with it, like a baseball thrown right at his face, it could knock a bunch of teeth out.
Yeah, that could do it. So he had dentures. So yeah, what's not clear is how many teeth were taken out. Because sometimes, especially back then, if you lost the majority of your teeth, they would remove the remainder to put the dentures in. Now, probably not as much. They would work around the normal anatomy that you had remaining. But back then, eliminating normal anatomy would not have been unusual for a dentist. It was a primitive time.
I wonder how many people in his situation got their teeth knocked out by a grenade. Like, is he the only one?
I've never heard of that.
Is he the only one that's ever happened to?
I got to think that there's got to be at least one other person in the United States around that time who had that happen.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe he belonged to an elite club.
Maybe it was an elite club of the toothless grenade chewers.
Yeah. That is the image that comes to mind. Somebody just chewing on a grenade.
It's like chick treated like an apple. I don't know.
It makes no sense. It almost sounds like, a story that he made up. Maybe he was eating a lot of sugar in the army. But look, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. He's not here to defend himself. So something happened with the grenade, and it permanently injured him. So anyway, we see that he found work as a postal carrier in 1944, and then he visited with his wife, Ruby, visited a boarding house in New Hampshire. This is where he met Betty. She was renting a room there. So this is the start of their relationship. He eventually divorces, and he looks Betty up. And they become a couple, and he moves to New Hampshire. So again, interracial couple in New Hampshire during a time when that was uncommon. We see they would marry in 1960, not long before the incident that we'll be talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, they weren't married long before that, which is, I don't know, they're in their, Betty's in her 40s by the time they get married. Barney is almost 40. So, I mean, at that point, they've been adults for a while, of course, and I'm sure they're pretty familiar with themselves and, knowing themselves. So to experience something as intense as the encounter that we're going to talk about, being that age, I don't know. I'm trying to picture like a teenager potentially experiencing something like an alien interaction, and all right, so they're gonna, not really understand maybe what was going on or maybe what they saw, but somebody in their 40s or around 40. I guess you might tend to put a little bit more trust in them, depending on what's going on. But at the same time, it's like, well, is that really true? So I don't know. Obviously, we're speculating. We're going to be speculating about a lot of things. But it's not like they were young and just had some crazy story to make up. They'd already been pretty well established in their life.
Yeah, they seem to be well adjusted and well respected. They worked. Unusual kind of demographic to just make up something as ludicrous as what we're going to get to. Yeah. So now starting with the famous incident, right? And Mike, you said the different names for this, like there was
the Zeta Reticuli incident and the Hill abduction.
Interrupted journey.
The interrupted journey, which would actually be the name of a book written on the subject. Yeah,
interesting book. So we see now moving to September 17. This is 2 days before the incident. Betty and Barney go on a trip in their 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air. They're heading for Niagara Falls, Toronto, and Montreal.
So Bel Air was a great car.
Yeah.
Bel Air was just
a good choice in vehicles, for sure. They also took a couple other items with them I found curious, a .32 caliber semi-automatic pistol, and their dog Delcy. So now Betty owned the pistol.
The dog came back.
The dog is absolutely safe.
The dog is absolutely safe. There's no dogs harmed in the making of this story at all. The dog's not alive now because it was 1960s.
Probably not. Yeah.
Really old dog at this point.
That would be the story.
That would be the story. If Delcy was still around, that would totally be the story.
Forget that alien stuff. That dog is like 60 years old.
60-some years old.
You could have an alien in the background of that and be like, look at the dog. Wow.
It's like, get that alien.
Get the alien out of the way. It's a 60-year-old dog.
It's the kind of thing you see in the newscast. And like, did anybody notice the alien? No, the dog. Don't focus on the aliens.
The dog is 60 years old. How do we make all the other dogs like this?
Yeah, so this was their trip. Apparently, they didn't have a lot of money. Right, so I think they actually ended up sleeping in the car for one or more of the nights they were out. On September 19, around 10:30 p.m., they were driving back to, I don't know how to pronounce this, but if it was around here, it'd be Lancaster, New Hampshire. But who knows what it is in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
We again don't pretend to know how to pronounce everything.
That's right. It's probably something like Lancaster, New Hampshire. And they were driving through the White Mountains, which apparently is a well-known deal up there in New Hampshire.
I think it's a state park.
It's kind of
I've never been. You guys ever been to New Hampshire?
I've been there. I don't remember the White Mountains, but
I've never been up. You ever been up there, Mike?
I've been up there a couple of times, and not too much in New Hampshire. I've kind of gone through it, stayed there briefly on my way to Maine.
I'm missing out. I've never been up. Oh, well, that's not true. We went up to Boston for our honeymoon. Am I missing out on New Hampshire life?
New Hampshire's a pretty cool state. I mean, it's a lot like Vermont.
I've never been there either, so.
and
I mean,
somewhat,
they're very similar, Vermont and New Hampshire.
yeah, and somewhat like I guess maybe southern Maine. Maine gets really rural when you get, you go up a bit, but yeah, the whole area is pretty peaceful.
Okay.
I think
They tend to be, the people there tend to be a little bit more progressive, sort of like in Delaware. It's kind of a New England kind of area. So, but I do think that there are bunches of areas in the more rural areas of those states, much like in Delaware, where you get down to the southern areas of Delaware and Lewis County and things like that, where it becomes a lot more conservative. And attitudes tend to be a little bit more different.
Definitely.
yeah, a lot of hunting, a lot of outdoorsman type stuff and hunting, a lot of pickup trucks.
Yeah.
Well. But you can't really go wrong with a pickup truck. So
Yeah.
It's a good place to put a political sign if that's what you're into. That's the only place I've ever seen a political sign in the back of it wasn't like it was a campaign person, like it was just a regular person driving down the highway. It was in Sussex County, Delaware.
They have all kinds of uses.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've had a pickup truck and put anything in the back of that thing. Political signs, dirt, whatever. About the same thing.
I was supposed to say it might be the same.
Same value. Yeah. Well, dirt you can actually use for something. I remember one time we were putting dirt in the backyard, and we bought it at a place not far from here. And I had a full-size truck. I almost always had a full-size truck, like a half-ton, which is really a light-duty truck. And we had a few Tacomas, which is a Gen 1, which are smaller and not really workhorses the same way in terms of the weight. And we went to get the dirt, and there was some miscommunication about how much to put in, and it was just right to the ground. Yeah.
So it went in the Tacoma or the full size?
No, it went in the Tacoma.
Oh,
yeah, because we were just getting a little bit, just to fill in some holes, not to like build a mountain, which apparently the guy must have thought.
He must have had fun with that. I assume he had some kind of loader or something.
Yeah, he had a huge front loader. Yeah,
I'm sure he was having fun with that then.
I think it was like a 9-yard loader. I don't know how much he put in, but it was.
Oh, jeez.
It was a lot. Dirt's heavy. Right? Yeah.
Yeah, dirt can be very heavy.
Yeah, dirt can weigh something. So this night was clear. The moon was out, and it was warm. Right, so peaceful night driving back in your Bel Air with your gun and your dog. Two
And your
important
wife.
things. Yeah. And your wife. And Barney was driving the vehicle. So Betty, as a passenger, sees a bright light in the sky.
Before that, they had stopped at a diner, and they had some coffee because it was a long drive back because they were from Montreal back to their home was about 5-hour drive. So earlier in the evening, they'd stopped off at a diner, sat down, had some coffee.
Yeah. So they were
maybe
tired.
some pie. I don't know.
There may have been pie
There
involved.
may have been pie involved, which would have been great.
That would have that complete the story. You got your 57 Bel Air, and you're driving through country roads, and you got pie at a diner. That sounds like a really nice story.
They're living the dream.
I don't think I've ever been to a diner that didn't have what was billed as world's greatest pie.
Right. Yeah.
And usually the pie's pretty good.
That's kind of their thing. Yeah.
And every diner, though, has the world's greatest pie.
So they were, by all accounts, having a good time, getting ready to go home so they could go back to work. So Betty sees this bright light in the sky. She thought it was a falling star, but it was moving upward in the sky, so that was peculiar. And then it started growing brighter and moving erratically. Betty told Barney, stop the car. So I love this. So they could examine it, and their dog needed to walk.
Yeah, the dog needs to go for a walk, but we need to examine this light in the sky.
They hold the same value, really.
Yeah, get it.
Maybe they, I'm curious. Maybe they did at that point, upon them seeing it. Maybe it was kind of like, oh, maybe it's just some weird thing in the sky, or maybe they weren't too concerned about it. I didn't get any any kind of understanding of it either way. If they were really concerned about it, or if they were just curious at that point.
I think it probably would have been curious. The cultural zeitgeist didn't really include a lot of alien abduction stories. I mean, this is one of the prototypes for the abduction story, UFO landings. And of course, there was things like the Roswell incident in 1947, but even that was kind of would have been forgotten by that point. Yeah, TV shows would have been showing a lot of sci-fi stuff, but it wouldn't have been one of those things I've seen a ton of movies about aliens coming down. A few, And Betty was known to be a sci-fi buff. Like, she did like the sci-fi stuff.
When was the day the Earth stood still? That was before 61, right? Was it Gort the robot?
Gort.
Remember, there was a remake with Keanu Reeves, but the original,
which was terrible.
Yeah.
I like Keanu Reeves on a lot of things. That was not one of them.
I think the day the Earth stood still was in the 50s, but I don't know that.
51.
51. All right, so 10 years before.
And the remake was 2008.
Yeah, well, I just try to forget about that. What they were doing there, I have no idea what that remake.
Thanks for bringing that up. It was traumatic.
So we see here that, and we see, this is where we start to get slightly different stories. So it's not exactly clear what happened from this point on. Like, of course, when you make stuff up, that is a hazard, I guess. Barney pulled over just south of the Twin Mountain Scenic Picnic Area. Now, Twin Mountain, I think, is an attraction, a geographical attraction in New Hampshire in the White Mountains. Betty had a pair of binoculars that had a strap on them. Mm-hmm. This becomes important later. She looked at the light. She said it was an odd-shaped craft containing multicolored lights that were flashing.
Yeah. Traveling across the face of the moon.
Yeah, so definitely would get your attention. She thought it was a flying saucer, which she knew about because her sister claimed to have seen one a few years before.
So she did have familiarity with it. And it seems like it was on her mind too, potentially. If I see something in the sky, I'm kind of have this on my mind because my sister went through this. So maybe there already was some thought about, maybe this is a UFO or something.
Maybe a little rivalry.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, maybe.
I don't know. So Barney also took a look, and he thought it was an airliner. But then he changed his mind when the object approached their position at high speed. At this point, he tended to believe that it was some type of flying saucer. We see that they get back in their vehicle, and they drive to a mountain pass called Franconia Notch, which I think is also a pretty well-known spot in New Hampshire. They continued to watch the objects as it came closer. So here's what I picture, right? The way they describe this, again, they have two different stories, but and then it gets kind of twisted around later. But it almost sounded like we'll just call it a spaceship, was chasing them.
Yeah.
And like Betty's like leaning out of the window. Barney, speed it up. We're getting chased by a saucer here.
She's leaning out the window with the binoculars, trying to get a good look at him while looking back. Oh my goodness gracious.
There's a big Christmas tree chasing us. Yeah. So this happened for a while. Apparently the saucer was very interested in their Bel Air. And
which doesn't make a lot of sense to me, really. Like, if there is an alien craft floating several thousand feet in the air at night, why would they pinpoint on a single car on a country road out in the middle of nowhere and just be like, them, we want them?
yeah,
It doesn't make a lot of sense. And there probably were other cars on other roads. Maybe just happenstance, they just happened to see them.
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
Or they just like the Bel Air.
Yeah, they just had an affinity for that particular
Oh, it's
design.
Bel Air. Let's go check it out.
The aliens have good taste in the vehicle. Yeah, but you have to wonder, in New Hampshire now, I'm sure, probably has people all over the place, just like everywhere in the East, in the Northeast. But back then in 61, in kind of a semi-rural mountainous area, I wonder if there were too many other cars in the area. They don't report having encountered any other vehicles at that time, but they were probably distracted by this big saucer-like object. But I don't know, late at night, you have people at work at night, but would they really go through the mountains? It might have been pretty sparse. Yeah.
Yeah, those headlights aren't that powerful, though.
Right, especially back then. Yeah.
Well, if we're talking about aliens, perhaps we're going under the assumption that they have regular eyesight, like we would think of as regular eyesight, but maybe they've got some kind of.
We'll talk about their eyes later.
But maybe they have some kind of different abilities that we couldn't possibly fathom that made them, we pick out this object, whatever. So I don't know. I guess there's other assumptions you can go off of.
They have scanners that can tell them who's looking at them.
Yeah, probably. Why not?
Maybe they just like shiny
those
things.
people are looking at us. Let's go get them.
Yeah, right.
They like shiny things that move.
I see the binoculars. Get them.
Yeah.
Or see the dog. Get him.
They wanted the dog.
That dog's going to live to 60 years old. Get him.
It's a wonder of the world. You must have that dog. All right. So
The dog was not abducted.
That's
just
right.
to say.
The dog was safe. As far as I know, the dog was safe during this whole incident, whatever happened.
And didn't tell any stories. Didn't write a book.
Nope.
No
Didn't
books,
give
no
any
stories.
interviews.
Just rolled his eyes every time somebody would start talking about it.
Did not cash in at all. Yeah. So not a very business savvy dog, I'm afraid. That would be the downside for the dog. So we see the object hovers 90 feet above the vehicle, right? So it comes up, it catches up with them. Barney once again brings the vehicle to a stop, and he puts Betty's .32 caliber pistol in his pocket. And he looks at the object with binoculars, which is interesting because 90 feet really
90 feet's not that far.
It's not even 2 tractor trailers away. That's curious. He saw 8 to 10 humanoid, not alien lizard humanoid, but just
humanoid figures.
Figures. Now, the way he kind of described them, and again, we see these long, these protracted explanations. I got this impression of like German soldiers.
Yeah, that's what I got too. Like they had on what, red hats and dark colored uniforms.
Yeah.
Said they were
like
shiny or something as well. Was it shiny black? Is that what it was?
Yeah.
And the hats they describe almost sound like a beret. Like they said it was what, well, they said it was what trainees would use, but I don't know why I got my mind, it was like a beret. I guess trainees wouldn't have a beret. What do military trainees have in terms of a hat?
I think it depends on the branch of the military and the country. Yeah. Some of them have the envelope hat. Like it folds flat.
Could have been that.
Could go on.
Yeah.
So that they can stick it underneath their epaulette.
But that wouldn't necessarily be a trainee because officers have those too, right?
Yeah,
Like,
some of them do have berets.
yeah.
But which level in the military would they allow to go in a flying saucer? Would they allow trainees to go in a flying saucer?
Well, they were chasing a car around, so maybe they were new at
Maybe they were just, joyriding.
right.
In the
Unauthorized.
flying saucer. It was an unauthorized. They were AWOL and just running around with the
Looking for
flying
somebody
saucer from Area 51.
looking for somebody to mess with or something.
So what I found funny about his description is that the figures appear to be looking out of the window of the craft, and I don't know why. I mean, they're very professional, right? They have the uniforms, maybe a beret. I don't know. And here they are, like
just staring out the window, looking back. One of them's got binoculars, looking back at Barney.
So interestingly, one of the figures communicated a message to Barney saying, "Stay where you are and keep watching."
Now there's some entertainment value coming. Mm-hmm. That's my understanding anyway.
That's right. Then we see this one story about a long telescoping structure, but other stories have these wing-like things coming out. So it was like a transformer, I guess, right? There was all kinds of stuff just coming out of this frisbee with lights on it.
And it's like red lights on what appeared to be bat-wing fins began to telescope out of the side of the craft. And a long structure then descended from the bottom of the craft.
Yeah, so it was just coming apart.
It's just a circle, and then it opens up its gull wing doors. And then...
Well, they're popular in space because you can't roll over and get trapped, like.
That makes sense.
So here we see that after the Transformer episode, Barney did not walk. He ran back to the Bel Air, and he said, "Betty, they're going to capture us."
I mean, I would too.
Yeah.
I would definitely run.
That would be scary. Not only you see these people now, these things, not people, these things, and you get a message from them, and then the light and the wings, and time to be scared, I think.
He had the appropriate response. Interesting that no action with the gun. The gun never actually gets a role in the story.
No, other than being in his pocket.
Yeah, it was in his pocket, and he one time, I think under hypnosis or something, he said he was too scared to pull it out and fire it. He wanted to, but he couldn't. It was one of those. What was that movie, E.T. with the little kid and the alien? I always thought of E.T. as a horror movie, but the alien comes up and he scares him to death,
right?
And he can't call for help.
Uh-huh.
That was what Barney was doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they did.
He just wanted to make a phone call.
It was a simple request.
They did experiments too. I mean, with people who are in situations where they're scared, who have a weapon of some sort, and they are too frozen to take it out, or they're just kind of fumbling with it, things like that. So it sounds like a situation like that. He's shocked. He's never seen anything like this, and got to think about reaching for the gun first, remember that it's there. So this sounds like a typical situation where you might forget about it. You might just not realize that it's time to get the gun.
Yeah, individuals who aren't trained in, that kind of pull the gun for this thing tend to freeze up with it. On the other hand, people who are trained to go to the gun tend to go to it more quickly.
Right.
Than would strictly be necessary, and which is an unfortunate thing that we're seeing quite a lot of in our modern time.
Yeah. A lot of officers that go right to the firearm and put their finger inside the trigger guard, which makes no sense. You're supposed to put it on the frame and then pull the trigger. So there's like a few stages that they're supposed to, but they go right. They mount that trigger with their finger and fire quickly.
They are trained very specifically to go to the weapon and to go very quickly with things. And there are some really great trainings out there that are not highly publicized and not highly used amongst police agencies that are talking about using stress to evaluate the situation before going to a firearm. But most agencies teach to just go to the firearm. If you can, go to the taser, right? But if it's a weapon situation, go to the firearm. And they just go and they don't really teach how to deal with the stress of the moment, which is the big factor that would keep somebody from freezing, or would keep somebody freezing up, or pulling and shooting when there's no weapon, or after a person's thrown down their weapon and is running away.
There's timing problems, and there's also tunnel vision, and the hearing becomes restricted, and all kinds of. It's definitely a stressful moment, and we have hours or years sometimes to examine what somebody had 2 seconds to decide. So
and less than that in many cases. And action and reaction do not have equal time. There was an experiment I watched on video of that was kind of a police officers given a light gun and a projector screen, and they were shown a person who had a firearm, and they were told like turn around and then react. Okay, so they turned around, were able to bring the gun up, and then they started, because they heard a bang sound go off, and they pulled the trigger. Every single one of them shot the person in the back because the person on the screen turned around, because the bang was them dropping their weapon and turning. And so the officers were then pulling the trigger based on the idea of this person is facing me with a weapon and there's a loud noise. And by the time they pulled the trigger, the other person had turned completely around and was moving away. And it can happen that fast.
Yeah.
Not even 2 seconds. It's quarters of seconds to make decisions that can end a life and a career.
Right.
Yeah, it's very sad. And I think some of the shootings too, like Ashley Babbitt. You familiar with the shooting of Ashley Babbitt?
I'm not familiar with
the January 6th riot. She was the.
Oh yeah. Yes.
Yeah. It's become politicized, right? So if you're liberal, you're supposed to say, "Oh, it was justified," and if you're conservative, you're supposed to say, "Oh, it was terrible." But regardless of that, it was terrible. I didn't think it was a good shoot. They won't identify the officer who did it, and I don't think it has anything to do with the politics at all. Yeah. I mean, she was unarmed, and it was one person, and there was a SWAT team within like 10 feet of her. Just seems so unnecessary, and she was killed with a single bullet. And I guess the debate now, which we'll never know, is did he warn her? And you won't see it on the video, but you can't hear everything in the video.
Right. Those videos are very chaotic anyway, because that was a very chaotic day, no matter what.
She was actually kind of pushed. I mean, she wanted it, but somebody actually pushed her up into the door. The window's broken out, and she was climbing through, and she just kind of crossed into the next. It was like a hallway or something, and you can see the gun coming out of like the left side. You can't see the shooter. Presumably it was a Capitol Police officer, because they're exempt from all the rules of, like, they can't be identified. Like Congress would have to choose to identify them.
Oh, okay.
They're shielded way more than like a state police officer or FBI or whatever. And he fires a single shot, and you have to wonder, like, there was nothing else you could do. Like, I get it, they were breaking the law. Riots are bad. We got it, but there was no other options, really. Yeah. And now it's like you can't even talk about it because it's been so politicized. It's like, there's no actual dialogue on the point.
Sure.
Right.
Very unfortunate day.
Yeah.
It was.
A person died. I mean, I think sometimes people forget that.
Well, multiple people died that day. So.
Yeah. I mean, that specific incident.
Yeah.
And there continues to be suicides from officers, I guess, that were there,
Right.
even recently, even within the past few weeks. So there's, I think, 3 or 4 at this point. So it's had lasting effects too.
Yeah, it was a terrible, terrible day. Surreal. I remember, watching it in real time, like on the internet and all, and wow. But yeah, I think it speaks to, how everybody reacts differently. And, even to the, talking about that case, like that police officer was under stress. Mm-hmm. All these rioters, one comes through the thing, so you could defend him. You could flip it around and say, well, maybe he didn't know she was unarmed, or,
Sure.
His ability to evaluate was tested, and he evaluated that she was a deadly threat, and pulled the trigger. Barney, on the other hand, didn't have that kind of training, and arguably, if this happened, was under a lot of stress and froze up, and didn't think about. I was like, I want to pull this gun out, but I don't. But didn't know how.
Which may explain the grenade thing a little more, right? Like, of course, again, the whole head would be.
Yeah, I would think, but maybe it was a box of grenades that was just chucked at him and hit him like square in the face, and then he had to, they told him to pick up all the grenades before he'd go to the infirmary because military in the '60s.
And your teeth.
Different
pick up
thing.
the teeth.
Oh yeah,
too.
pick up your teeth.
Pick up
Take 'em with
everything.
you. Pick up everything.
I don't know if you guys mind this question, but I'm curious if you believe that there may be some kind of alien life out there, and if the answer is not yes or no, is there a percentage of you that thinks maybe? Any answers for that?
Life in general?
Yeah. Alien life. Well, I don't know. I don't know how you would
Right.
define
Not
that,
specifically this story, but
right.
Yeah.
So my opinion is that there is no evidence at this time that there is, but it's almost certainty that there is other life forms out there in the universe, other planets that have the potential for creating the same environments that we have would create life.
So you're talking even just little
Microbes, plants, plant-like creatures, a variety of other flora type or fauna type of life, I'm sure exists. I'm not so sure about intelligent life.
Sure. Okay.
Because if we look at just this planet and look at the literally trillions of life forms that have existed on this planet, from every single variety of single-celled organism from the beginning of life on this planet to today, trillions or even trillions of life forms of different species and different types of things, and we have evolved on this planet one species that has the intelligence and the metacognition that human beings currently have. I mean, there's like 3 or 4 other hominid species in our past that had a similar thing, but they all kind of came, like they differ and either died off or bred back into what we are now. The likelihood of that developing in other places is very, very low. I mean, although there are, as Carl Sagan used to say, billions and billions of universes out there, of galaxies out there. So it is possible that there's a higher likelihood of intelligent life. But if it's, intelligent life occurs, 1 in a trillion stars, then maybe there's one life form in every galaxy, and then the distances between those galaxies are so vast that there's virtually no way with anything we can think of right now, realistically, to be able to traverse those distances. Aliens would have to have incredibly advanced technology to be able to just manipulate physics.
Yeah. Well, the question of aliens is interesting because with many things, the theistic argument or the deistic or atheistic argument comes in. Like many things kind of fall according to, spiritual beliefs or not. And aliens is peculiar because I think in some sense, if you believe in aliens, you can still stick with an atheistic or deistic, like Carl Sagan was a deist, Albert Einstein was a deist, essentially. They're like, there's a God, but there's no way the God cares about us. He created us and he's gone. And we live and die. And Einstein even said, essentially he'll be happy when he's dead. He only wants to live the one time. Like he wasn't looking for anything. And Carl Sagan, of course, his wife was proud that he died without reaching out into theism, essentially. Which seems odd to be proud of that, but I guess that was his value going in, and she thought he should stick with it. So it's just, I guess, his commitment to his initial belief. But it's kind of a weird thing. You have the Fermi paradox, and you have other elements here that kind of tie in with, like, you know, with the whole alien situation. You could say, like, okay, there are aliens out there. Does that mean you would believe in God or not? Right? I guess you could say it's more of an atheistic, has an atheistic component or a deistic component. But if there weren't aliens, that would lean more toward, I think, a theistic, because we're the only ones. And mathematically, I agree, we shouldn't be. There should be other life forms out there. So in a way, it kind of flips around, I think, the spiritual politics a little bit, to where you have kind of like conservative theists saying, no, we're alone. And you have people who would be more atheistic or deistic saying, no, there must be all kinds of stuff out here that's fanciful. Not necessarily unrealistic, but just fanciful based on what we know. So I feel like that question kind of flips around traditional spiritual camps, so to speak. That's how I've always looked at it.
That's interesting. I never would have thought to bring in any kind of spiritual, religious, anything into that conversation, but that makes sense. How would one, with a belief, explain what might or might not be out there? So that's an interesting point.
I think to speak to that point, the word belief inherently includes a lack of evidence.
Oh yeah, you're right. Faith.
It's based on faith, and we have zero evidence of aliens, despite the cases like this where we have eyewitness testimony. There's no physical evidence has ever been found,
right,
ever, of aliens visiting this planet or their existence anywhere else in the universe. So with that lack of evidence, it is all belief.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Good point.
So that's why I think it kind of shifts around the typical paradigms, because now you have kind of more atheistic and deistic thinking saying, no, they must be out there, right? Which again, I think makes sense statistically, but normally in that position, like scientific materialists would say, if there's no evidence, they can't be there, right? So I feel like it challenges a lot of the spiritual groupings.
To be fair, a lack of evidence is not, or an absence of evidence is not evidence of absence.
Right.
But we don't have any evidence to confirm anything. So the default is they don't exist until we have evidence that they do.
Right.
And the claim that they exist is where evidence must come from. Like those people making a claim that aliens exist are the ones who have to provide evidence.
Yeah, but no one ever has.
And nobody ever has. Mm-mm. Nobody ever has. And the people will ask, I'm sure there will be comments about people saying, well, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? I'm like, but you have to prove that. I'm not making a claim that is evidence. How is that evidence?
Right.
You explain that to me. The burden of proof is on the person making the claim. And all I'm saying is that I've not seen any evidence that is realistic and credible that indicates that aliens have ever gotten to this planet. And without any evidence of that, we can't say that there is evidence that they're out there.
Yeah, we know that like spirituality, regardless of somebody's belief system, motivates decisions. We say that all the time. So one of the paradoxes I find interesting is in the theistic systems, people hoping for aliens, but really without them, that would prove, I guess you could say, that would lean more on the side of theism. Again, like there's no way we can be the only ones here if we weren't created by, I guess you could also say deism, right? It wouldn't have to be theistic, but theistic is a whole different argument of caring, right? And with all the suffering in the world, you could make an argument that there is no evidence of caring. That gets into a whole nother, this is why Einstein ended up started as a theist and went to a deist. I think that exact thing. He saw so much pain in his life that he's like, I don't think a God would like all this, like would create all this. But I don't think all this happened through random error and, evolution, all that. So I'm going to go with deism. I guess what Einstein also said that you could not be smart enough to figure out the answer to that question. And this is coming from arguably one of the smartest people in history in terms of sheer IQ.
Some deep thoughts.
Yeah. Maybe far beyond what Barney and Betty Hill were contemplating on this evening.
Yeah, that evening after Barney said, they're going to capture us. They get in the car and they start driving away.
Welcome to this episode of Tangents. Tonight we'll be talking about philosophy and aliens and the Fermi paradox. Okay.
Some people might ask what the Fermi paradox is in the comments. I'm just pointing that out.
Yeah, this idea that by now we should have run into life if life was out there, which actually mathematically makes a lot of sense. And this is again where you see physicists saying, well, no, maybe we were the first ones in a universe that's huge.
Yeah. Our planet's not even that particularly old in our galaxy. So, if there are other cultures that existed, if any planet that could create life ultimately ends up creating intelligent life, then there are got to be species of intelligent creatures out there that have been around for billions of years. And it gets into the idea that any sufficiently advanced civilization is just going to destroy themselves before they can leave their own planet.
That's possible.
Which is a thing. I don't see that.
We're doing a pretty good job of destroying ourselves here.
We're doing a good job. We're also doing a good job of trying to protect ourselves. I mean, there's a balance there, and there's a lot of. But we got a lot more people alive today than we ever have in the history of our species.
Like over 7 billion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in the United States, the until 2020 happened, our average life expectancy was the highest it had ever been.
Right.
People are living longer and longer. So I mean, to say we're destroying ourselves. There's some areas of the world where you can look around and say that's absolutely true, and other areas of the world we're like, well, how you getting that? How you figuring that out? And whether or not you believe in climate change, the evidence is very clear on the subject. It's happening.
Yeah, whatever the cause. There's a lot. I think most people dispute the cause, but it almost doesn't matter. At some point, it becomes academic. It is actually happening technically.
It is happening. I think the thing that a lot of people, they're like, humans can't be in charge of it. Like, yeah, we did. It was going to happen because the world is still warming up from the Ice Age. That was only 10,000 years ago. And geologically speaking, that was a blink ago. We're still warming up from that, from that Ice Age. But that what should have taken the next 400 years is going to happen in the next 100 years. And that's where mankind put so much stuff into that sped up that rate. The increase in temperature is going to happen very, very rapidly.
Is it because I left my heater on too long during the winter? Is that why?
It's Jeff's fault.
You let your car idle in the driveway too long.
My Prius, right?
That's right.
Yeah, that's one of the things I think they pointed out on Top Gear at one point. It was like the amount of actual impact to the environment from electric cars is actually way higher than for the production of fossil fuel burning cars, because the lithium ion batteries are horrendous impact on the environment just to create those batteries, and we don't know how long those will last. They're rechargeable, but how long will that vehicle last? Is it going to last as long as that 57 Chevy Bel Air could last if it was really well maintained?
Well, we know consumers don't trust. I don't know how long they'll last either, but consumers don't trust them. Is why manufacturers offer those warranties where they'll replace the whole battery in 10 years or whatever. They're desperate to convince people the batteries will last. But yeah, I'm skeptical that the electric vehicle route actually changes anything. They're torquey, they're so fast.
Oh yeah, because it's immediate torque to the wheels. I still want a Tesla. I do.
There's that minivan
especially the Roadster.
There's
Tesla Roadster.
Yeah, there's a minivan that can do 0 to 60 in 3 seconds or something, like Lamborghini, Nissan GTR territory. Mm-hmm. But I would like that minivan.
I would love. I'm not a big minivan guy, but if you can go to 0 to 60 in 3 seconds,
you're willing to be willing to jump ship.
I might be. That's faster than my car. I think that's better acceleration than my Challenger.
I think the fastest car I ever had was 0 to 60 in 4.5 seconds, and that was unbelievable. I couldn't imagine 3 seconds. Yeah,
it's a Bugatti Veyron's faster than that though. 2.3 seconds 0 to 60, and then 4.5 to 100.
Is it that quick?
Yeah.
I know.
The Chiron, the newest one.
Okay.
The W16 1500 horsepower.
I know a Nissan GTR, I think is 2.7, and that's always been a standard because you figure all-wheel drive, incredible technology, massive engine. Considering it was a V6, but it's twin turbocharged. So the GTR is like a modern marvel. But anything faster than that, that's amazing.
Yeah, the Bugatti Chiron and the Veyron were both incredibly fast. W16 engine, quad turbocharged. The thing's just insanely powerful. 1,500 brake horsepower. Wow. Insanely powerful. And yeah, like 2.3 seconds, 0 to 60.
I think like
And to 100 in another 2 seconds after that.
I think tanks use W engines, right? Yeah, like the Sherman tank they're pretty amazing.
If only Barney had one, though.
Yeah,
He'd be able
but
to get away from the
He
UFO.
would have been able to get away, but it was apparently following them, making a beeping or buzzing sound.
That's right.
And things bouncing off the trunk of the car.
Yeah, it was a pretty scary time.
Apparently they were shooting pellets or something like that. Instead
limit of their technology.
All this unlimited technology to cross the universe, and then they start shooting with pellet guns instead of like a tractor beam.
They overinvested in propulsion.
Apparently.
So
they overinvested in the hats.
The style. It was style that was their strength. We're here to bring that to you.
We're just trying to give you style.
Yeah, so we see, Barney is apparently driving away high speed. He has these objects or something hitting the vehicle, or at least making a noise. And then we see that the couple goes into an altered state of consciousness. And here's where it gets even fuzzier with their different accounts, and they change their accounts several times. But we see that they traveled 35 miles and had essentially no memory, but they remember making a sudden and unplanned turn, running into a roadblock, and seeing a fiery orb. Like this is before their period of unconsciousness.
And there were even some differences in that. One, I think Barney said that he saw two men standing in the middle of the road and didn't mention the fiery orb. And Betty was like, there was just a fiery orb there. And it's really weird. I watched a podcast earlier this afternoon and talked about this just to see different perspectives on things. And they made a joke about that was about the time when the drugs that they put in the coffee at the diner kicked in.
Or in the pie. Might have been in the pie.
Might have been the pie.
Yeah, so they're saying something happened. They didn't really remember. And so essentially, like, you think of like alien abduction, you think, okay, they're going to have more of a Travis Walton-esque experience, right? Where you're a lumberjack or whatever he was in the woods and you're with your friends and then you run into this
hit by a beam and picked up and knocked out and then
not seen for days, whatever it was.
Right, and then show up at a phone booth mysteriously and all kinds of weird things with that story. That should be another story we cover on this.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, we should definitely cover Travis Walton.
It's an amazing story. But yeah, you think that's how it would be, right? But of course that happened later, if I'm not mistaken. That was
1975.
Yeah.
That was 1975. So there was a good 14 years of coverage of things of this story before we got to...
I think Travis was almost certainly inspired by this story.
I'm sure he was.
But this is a safe way to go. Running on the assumption they're making things up. This is kind of a safe way to go because you can block out the time for your experience and then you can fill it in later under mysterious circumstances. So they were pioneers in deception, if in fact there weren't aliens that abducted them.
I mean, I have my own hypothesis of something that could have happened and is completely mundane, but still could be explainable through all of these things, but I'll get to that later. But yeah, they arrived home at dawn.
Right.
With virtually no memory of any of the rest of the evening after the roadblock.
Much later than their intended arrival time.
Yeah.
Then they started noticing things. And I always like this part of the story, right? It's like they get home, take the dog out, put the gun back wherever you put the gun, unpack. Although they left some bags at the back of the house for some reason.
Instead of bringing it to the main house, Betty insisted that their luggage be kept near the back door.
Yeah. It's okay, Then they start noticing bizarre elements in their daily lives.
Like their watches. Their watches stopped and would never work again. At that point, they probably didn't wind them.
You have to wind them. Yeah.
You have to wind those watches before they're battery driven.
Right. So some people might not know what that watch is, but back in yesteryear, it was actually kind of a big coil spring inside of a watch. I took many apart when I was a kid for whatever reason, like taking things apart.
Why not?
They were fascinating. Lots of gears, lots of all sorts of stuff.
So, like, the machinery, so well crafted.
Precise.
And tiny.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you did not wind them, the next day you'd find yourself doing this for like 10 minutes and then having to line up the time again. I also had a watch. I don't know if anybody else had this, but I had one that had like this flywheel in it. And when you'd move your wrist, it would
recharge that, so to speak.
Yeah, it would spin the coil, tighten the coil.
Spin the coil.
So it was like one way.
Yeah. There was a couple more recently that are electric to do the same thing. They use piezoelectric circuits, and as you move just your normal everyday stuff, it'll actually be charging the battery in the watch. And my dad actually has a flashlight that uses that same premise. And it says shake light. Like it's almost like the shake weight, but it's actually a flashlight. Like it's
more useful.
It's got a magnet on a rail inside the tube of the flashlight, and then copper coils around it. So if you just shake it, and it charges a capacitor inside, and you turn it on, LED light.
That's genius.
It is. It's a very wonderful, genius flashlight to have.
So instead of like electric or traditional electric cars, we need a car that...
Yeah, you just pick up the car and shake it. Well, but why don't we just get the car? You just push it backwards some and then let it go, like
a big rubber band. Right. Well, they were trying a car out in India that had compressed air. I saw. Yeah, so
that's cool.
Yeah, pretty interesting. I guess you get like a little foot pump if you run out on the side of the road. This is going to be a while.
You're inflating a mattress at the same time or something. I might as well just take a nap.
So here's some of the things they noticed, and some of these I find interesting. So you mentioned the watches. They never worked again. The leather strap for the binoculars was broken. Barney's shoes were torn up on top. The luggage at the back door. Betty noticed that her dress was torn and had pink powder on it that blew off when she put it on a clothesline the next day or afterward. The concentric circles on the trunk, so these I guess the paint was scratched or whatever on the trunk of their car. The compass was reacting to circles. I don't know why they had a compass near their trunk, but it was moving. The needle was spinning around. And then Barney was compelled to examine his genitals.
Mm-hmm.
Normal.
He could not seem to stop.
And he just had to check him out.
It happens from time to time. So the next day, September 21, Betty calls the Air Force on advice of a friend or relative who told her.
Air Force. That's who you call.
Mm-hmm. That's
exactly
could have been you, Mike.
I could have been in one of those departments.
Yeah. You could have picked up the phone.
I could have been. I mean, not in 1961, but later.
Well, if you were doing using the joystick to control the drone, you could have been doing that, answering the phone at the same time. Well, multitasking. That could be a big part of it. Right, there you go.
It'd be Purple Book at this point. You're going through colors. Project Purple Book.
Right.
Yeah, so she did call the Air Force, and she talked to Major Paul Henderson. And he said that you saw Jupiter. Pretty uneventful call.
You saw Venus through a gas explosion in the swamp, swamp gas, and
So they didn't have as good excuses then. They weren't trained for the, it was Jupiter.
Right. The men in black weren't going around at that point.
So then Betty had the dreams, and these dreams are very important to UFO fanatics or fans or whatever they would call it. The dreams, the 5 dreams that started 10 days after, and she had one each day. She remembered the content of those dreams better than any dream she ever had in her life. Here are some of the things she remembered. On the night of the encounter, they ran to the roadblock and walked into the woods. They were forced into the woods by 2 small men. They were about 5 foot to 5'4". Mm-hmm. Their skin was gray. They had black hair, prominent noses, dark eyes, and their lips were bluish.
And this would be a departure, actually, from... this would set a tone that would not be continued later on. Most descriptions, the more modern descriptions, say no noses.
Right.
Like very big eyes, no noses. But Betty was like, they had very prominent noses, very large, big noses on their faces.
Yeah, so... Yeah.
And hair, most of the time.
And black hair, yeah.
Black hair, yeah. Most of the time. Maybe it was wigs and prosthetic nose.
Give the eyeglasses with the nose.
The old Groucho Marx eyeglasses. Like, they would have been really popular in the 1960s, like, in the backs of comic books.
They pick some up on the way over. Right. This will do it.
It's like, we got to try not to scare them. Put this on.
Well, that's why they were coming for fashion, because if that's what they're putting on, then they got to save somebody from that nightmare.
That's right. They're like, this is the state of these people.
They'll never know. They'll never realize we're not human.
They were dressed in blue uniforms, and here we see the caps again, those similar to military cadets. So again, that reference.
And this is another departure that we see between Betty and Barney. She says blue uniforms, where Barney said black uniforms, which is interesting. And maybe there were different departments
Right.
on the ship.
Yeah, just like in Star Trek.
Just like in Star Trek, yeah.
Different colors mean different things. So we see here that they were walking through the woods. Barney seemed to be sleepwalking, so he was really no help. Barney checked out. He was gone.
Barney's just sleepwalking.
Yeah, freezing up as usual. And Betty and Barney would arrive at a disc-shaped craft, which appeared to be made out of metal. They were taken inside, and here we see another departure. Some stories say there were 2 examination rooms, and then another account says that there was one, and they had to take turns.
The one account said that it would take too long if they had to take turns. If
Right.
I'm not,
The aliens communicated that
right.
in perfect English.
And was that at the point that they started arguing, or did they argue after that? The aliens?
I believe that was after.
Was that after?
I think it was after, yeah.
Because I thought that was a strange thing. They made it all the way to Earth, but they're arguing, and I want to know what that was like, really.
Interestingly enough, they weren't actually speaking perfectly English. They were speaking Rigelian, but that sounds exactly like English.
Right, to her, right, to Betty. Well, one of them.
To everybody. I mean, that's what we learned from Kang and Kodos on The Simpsons. That's right. You had another Simpsons reference.
There's another Simpsons reference I want to use when we get to the anal probing. That
What a great sentence.
When we get to the anal probing part, I want to talk about The Simpsons.
So whatever happened in these exam rooms, they were examined one at a time, whether it was separate rooms or the same room. Betty named 2 of the figures on board the ship, the leader and the examiner. Right. The leader had the English that she understood, I believe, and the examiner was the one that was a little shaky. So when the leader was in the room, the examiner came in. He conducted a number of tests like ears, hands, eyes, teeth, arms, legs. At one point, I found this interesting, stuck a gigantic needle in her navel.
Yeah.
And the leader made it go away, waving his hand. So, timing, not their specialty.
Apparently, they took trimmings from her fingernails, took a dull knife similar to a letter opener and scraped skin samples off onto what resembled cellophane.
Yeah, so this kind of weird examination. So the examiner left the room, and Betty had some one-on-one time with the leader.
It wasn't the needle that vanished. It was the pain. Just to be clear.
Right. The pain went away.
The pain went away. Like it was excruciating when they put the needle into her belly button, and she was screaming in pain, and the leader just went.
He's like, "Let me take care of that."
Jedi mind trick. Oh, no pain.
If I came across some kind of thing that I wasn't familiar with, another species or something, I don't know what I would do, right? I guess I would be kind of curious what this thing's all about, and maybe that's why I might go to somebody else's planet. But I don't know. Would I examine them? I don't really think so. I mean, but I'm not the leader or the examiner, so perhaps not. I don't know. I really just want to talk to them, I think.
Like we'd be the ship's counselors. Like we'd just be like, "Hey, let's talk."
What color shirt would that be?
Oh, that's blue. That's blue. That's part of the sciences and medical side of things. So we'd have blue.
It'd have to be blue.
Yeah.
You're right. No, you're right. We would be the one-on-one time that you would have. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they weren't worried about viruses. This is pre-COVID, so I guess
Maybe they were wearing masks.
It was post War of the Worlds, though. So maybe they probably didn't listen to that one.
they missed that one. They were too distracted with the glasses and the nose.
I'm trying to find the Groucho Marx glasses. Where are they? There's this great program on the radio. Not now.
That's what they were looking for with the examination. I see. It all makes sense now.
So we see this kind of weird incident where Betty has this quality time with the leader. Presumably the examiner's off torturing Barney at this time, which we'll get to. So
There's a couch involved. There's tentacles coming around.
It's terrible. Yeah. So Betty grabbed a book that the leader said, "You can take that with you." I don't know why I find this funny. I can just see them like, "Oh, you like that?
You know what? Keep that. You can keep it.
It's yours.
You keep that."
And then just before they left, oh wait, I got to take that back. Sorry, you can't actually have that.
So the book contained rows of strange symbols, right? And then we see that Betty asks the leader where he's from, And conveniently, he has one of them pulled out.
This is where we're from.
As a matter of
It's
fact,
a star map he's got on a roll down, pull down pad. Although Betty did say it was more like holographic.
Later she changed it
Later
down,
she would
yeah.
say more holographic.
That's right.
But yeah, he showed her a map. Yeah.
maybe it was a teacher on his planet, like, well, I've got this lovely map right here.
Yeah, almost like he was expecting it. Like, hold that thought.
I've been waiting for that question.
You know, somebody might ask me someday where we're from, so I want to have a map installed right here so I can reference it.
Maybe it's a common question. They go to a lot of planets.
Like, this is the 500th abduction, and we haven't yet had anyone ask. Like, where are you from? Right here.
Maybe it was one of those maps where it's like, and then you turn left at the rock, and you turn right after you see the big, the big tree, the big one.
Yeah, but there's a left turn at Albuquerque,
Exactly. Right.
not a right turn.
It's like a children's menu, right?
You have to go through the
Go through the maze, get the crayons.
So we see that later on we find out what happened to Barney, but I'll just mention it now because it was, happened at the same time, where he had an examination as well, except his involved his genitals and his anus. So the aliens from Uranus, I guess, right? Now, the
That's a very childish joke. It's still funny.
but acceptable, yeah.
It's still funny.
Well, Spaceballs used a similar one right,
Yeah,
in the beginning.
Spaceballs used similar ones throughout the entire movie.
So we see a Simpsons episode, I think is one of my favorite moments in The Simpsons, where I think it was the two aliens that they're always using.
Kang and Kodos, every single Treehouse of Horrors.
Right. Yeah, they're in it. And so basically these kind of green octopus-like aliens. And Homer, realizing that he's been abducted by aliens, turns around and kind of makes his anus known. And they're like, something, I don't remember the line exactly.
Oh, we've reached the limit of what we can learn from anal probing.
Somehow I knew you would know the line. It was a great line. It was like, it's a must know.
It's a great line. It is a great line. I think that was the same one where they kidnapped Clinton and Bob Dole.
Right. Your two-party system.
Yeah, the two-party system. Which you've got to vote for one of us. It's a two-party system. It was my favorite line out of that is, don't blame me. I voted for Kodos. At the very end, Homer does that. I said that in 2016 repeatedly.
Well, they had a good point about the two-party system, right?
I mean, technically, it's not a two-party system, but third parties don't.
It's functionally.
Traction.
Yeah, it's functionally, yeah.
Which is unfortunate because over 50% of the voting population is registered as independent rather than registered to either of those two parties. So they don't represent the majority of Americans.
Not now.
Yeah.
I remember that line from that episode when the debates were going on between Trump and Biden, and I'm like, both these men are awful. Like, this is like, we have to, like, one will win no matter what. Like, that was where America lost, right? One of these guys is going to win. And sure enough, that happened, two-party system. Yeah. So,
I think was interesting when it comes back to Betty. I mean, the Kang and Kodos solved the whole, like, you'll remember us stuff by just dousing Homer in whiskey and throwing him out the door, because then it's like, nobody will believe you. And of course, like, he started telling this story and be like, oh, you smell like a distillery. But with Betty,
right, she has an argument.
She has an argument with the leader, and he's like, the rest of my crew say that they don't want you to tape the book and they don't want you to remember anything. And Betty defiantly says, no matter what you do to my memory, I'll remember this one day.
Yeah, seems like a risky threat to make to a bunch of military-looking aliens who just took a book out of your hand. Give me that book back.
The only evidence she might have had. Yeah.
Had rows of symbols.
Yeah.
What more do you need?
And then they were taken back to their car, and the leader suggested that they should just wait and watch as we fly away.
Yeah. So this is a part I've always had, imagined in a certain way, where like they're, the leader is like these crazy kids, they're like near 40 or whatever. These crazy kids.
Well, he's probably like 500 or something like that.
Yeah.
Alien races live in different,
Yeah. So
different time frames.
different time frames.
To him, they're much younger, and he kind of puts them in the car, makes sure their seatbelt. I think it was only a lap restraint back then, right? Makes the seatbelts tight. You know what, guys? You're really gonna like this part. Pay attention. I know the anus thing. I got it. But I want you to pay attention.
It might be a little uncomfortable, but we gave you a donut underneath. It's going to dissolve in a little while. You'll never find the difference, but just watch.
You got to see this part. It's going to make it all worth it. Yeah. And Barney's like, what about my genitals? Look, watch this. Like you let that go. You got to let that go. So anyway, so after this, so after this, they go home, and this is, they have the lost time and all this stuff, right? So this is all something that comes back to them later under hypnosis.
Mike's losing it. We might not get him back.
This story, I'll tell you. Whew. Yeah. It's one of those stories for sure. So at this point, we see that so Betty gets a book. She borrows a book at the library, and she writes the guy who's on the back of the book, the author of the book. And this leads to, it's kind of a long, complex process that goes through a few stages, but basically it leads to some interviews, and eventually we see she goes through hypnosis, her and Barney. Now, there's a few intermediate steps, like going public with the story in 1963 and 1962, a year before they traveled back to the site to try to find out where the site was, and they were able to
they called NICAP and talked to them, and they definitely were trying to find the site and everything. But then eventually they would meet Benjamin Simon.
Right. This was the big. They had hypnosis at other times too, but this was the guy who really, I think, invested in them. And interestingly, he did not believe their story at all. He was a military guy. I think he was a lieutenant colonel in the Army during World War II. Straight-laced by the book, but he was also psychoanalytic, which means he'd believe anything. So not anything with UFOs, just anything in terms of his ability to help them. He wanted to treat Barney for anxiety problems and memory loss. He thought that Barney might have dissociative amnesia, which I think is actually kind of a progressive diagnosis for somebody
for that
like
time.
Simon.
For 1964, it was absolutely very progressive diagnosis.
Yeah. So and who knows? Maybe it was right. So this sessions would recover the whole thing I talked about with the genitals and all that. That was that part that came back. That the binocular strap being torn, the men in the woods. So I put all that story together. But this is where it comes back for Barney. Barney is the central subject of the hypnosis.
Yeah. I mean, Betty would have her own sessions, and it was said they were done separately. But the only crossover was Dr. Simon.
Right. Right. He
which indicates that's the problem to me.
Right. Yeah. He treated them both, and I think there's actually photographs with Simon with them two in the room, and this was a thing. Like this was something that other people were paying attention to. Also makes me wonder what Simon was kind of doing there. Maybe he liked having high-profile clients.
The audio is kind of difficult to to listen to. The audio of them during the hypnosis sessions and. Lots of screaming and what sounds like really painful recalling of the memories. Mm-hmm. And so I've never seen any videos of it. I only heard the audio. Are there videos out there of it?
I don't think so. I think it's just audio.
Just audio. So,
video cameras at the time were huge.
Yeah. So, I'm trying to picture what's going on as I'm listening to this audio, and it sounds just very painful. It sounds like it's a very excruciating process for them. So I'm curious what that was actually like to watch, for Simon to see this happening and just trying to understand what to do for them at the moment kind of thing. Like, it's just, I don't know. I imagine it's a very strange situation that they were all experiencing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we talked about before we recorded that, I think it was last week briefly, that this is where a lot of UFO aficionados or whatever, I don't know what to call them, the UFO people, not the aliens.
They call themselves ufologists, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, you're right.
So the people interested in the UFOs, this is where their belief, this is where their evidence ostensibly comes from. Like the genuineness of the hypnotic process and the responses from Betty and Barney. It could have been faked pretty easily, but okay. They're like, no, all the stuff they said, might be nonsense. I get it, blah, blah, blah. But you have to listen to the hypnosis. Okay.
And the problem therein is how unreliable the memory recovery in hypnosis actually is. Hypnosis can be a useful tool, as I'm sure Jeff would have found out if he'd become a hypnotist.
If only.
That hypnosis can be a useful tool in helping to reinforce suggestions, especially when it's done multiple times over and over and over again for somebody who might be resistant to somebody saying, like, this is what you need to do. If we then go into a hypnotic state, we can say, okay, here's what you need to do. Try and remember this, and that can be incorporated if it's used to reinforced over and over again over the course of many sessions, which is what hypnotherapists love, is the fact that it takes a long time to do this. You got guaranteed a lot of sessions, but and it can be used to help with some regulation of emotional states and things like that. But when it comes to the memory recovery, it is notoriously unreliable because the memory recovery is nearly 100% dependent on the interviewer, not on the person who's in the hypnotic state. Right. And our brains just don't work well enough when they're in that state to be able to really recall good memory. I mean, it always gets blurred. And one of the things that I find interesting, like in a dream, it's not possible to read something you've never read because the prefrontal cortex doesn't have access to writing and creative imagination. You can read something you've already read because that's in memory. Mm-hmm. And most of the dream is just your prefrontal cortex processing memories. So you can draw something you've already read, but if you read half of Moby Dick and pick up Moby Dick and are reading it, you'll get to halfway point and it'll just be weird symbols. Kind of like what Betty said she saw in that strange book. And if
it could explain, it could explain what happened. Yeah, so hypnosis is one of those things a lot of people believe in, and it's a key part. You really have to believe in it to believe their story. Yeah, you have to. It's the Achilles heel. This has many Achilles heels. It's like a centipede of Achilles heels, but that's one of them. And we see here though that out of the hypnosis or whatever was going on, the map is born.
Oh yeah, she recalls the map.
12 prominent stars connected by lines and 3 smaller stars that make a triangle. Revolutionary.
Elaborate.
Yeah. And supposedly it was major trade routes that we visit all the time, and then smaller ones we don't go to very often, but we still know how to get there. And then those other ones are expeditions, like dotted lines that went off, were expeditions that were to the unknown. And apparently, without knowing how to label them, Earth was one of the ones they visit all the time.
How convenient. So people have taken this map very seriously. They've tried to match it to galaxy, solar systems, whatever. They tried to match it to whatever it's supposed to be: stars, planets, combination thereof, including abstractions like distances might not be accurate, proportional. They've beyond creative to get it to fit into anything that we know, like where it's just a pretzel. It's like that line's not actually straight; it's curved. And
Marjorie Fish was a school teacher, an amateur astronomer. And in 1968, she read the book, The Interrupted Journey, which is about this case. Mm-hmm. And she was intrigued by the star map. And she wondered if she could decipher it. So she started building models, like 3D models of stars. And she went to a lot of effort to find as many star systems as she could in actual known literature. Mm-hmm. And she built these things up. She's actually the one who identified the star system as Zeta Reticuli.
Which becomes the name of the incident.
Which becomes the name of the incident later.
Yeah, even though it wasn't really a good match to that either.
Yeah. Right. At the time, with what they knew, it seemed to be almost a perfect match. But then as we got more information in astronomy, it started falling apart further and further and further. And even she would recognize, Marjorie Fish would recognize later that it was completely nonsense.
Yeah. Yeah.
When she started including all of well, these are the other things that we found. Oh, yeah, it doesn't fit.
No, but it had people excited for a long time. And really, it was Betty's claim to fame for some years until she fell out of favor, which we'll get to. So Benjamin Simon essentially concluded after all this that Barney's memories were actually a fantasy inspired by Betty's fantasy, her dreams, a dream/fantasy, right? Dreams that she actually had, but then fantasy that she put on top of it. Barney, at this point, was not happy with that conclusion. He became convinced he had been abducted by aliens, and he was a skeptic, sort of, which is kind of weird. Like, he was playing like, I don't think it really happened. But then when he got pushback, he said, no, it did happen. But they did feel like their anxiety decreased, so they were happy with Simon.
Yeah, they're happy that the anxiety's down. Well, at least now we know what happened.
And feel better.
That to a point, that's great outcome for therapy. If the goal is to get the anxiety down and the anxiety ends up being down, great. You know, the side effect result is they now believe they were abducted by aliens. But
That's a side effect, a small detail.
little tiny side detail. We can work on that later.
You just keep that one to yourself for a while, and you'll come back and
Don't tell anyone you actually saw me. All right.
Right, I'm going to publish this though. So
yeah, Simon went on to I guess profit from this a little bit, but he didn't really seem that enthralled. The couple didn't either. They would go back to their normal lives, and they would talk to like journalists to occasionally write a story, or friends, family would come by, and I'm sure that was awkward. You know, like come by and make small talk, and then they're going to start asking about the aliens at some point.
well, their niece asked about it all the time. They had a niece who actually I think she either co-founded or is still the head of the Mutual UFO Network, also known as MUFON, which is one of the biggest social groups of people investigating UFO sightings and alien abduction cases and things like that. And she got into that because of her aunt and uncle.
And she does interviews all the time. I don't know all, but I've seen interviews, and she's convinced that they were telling the truth, and she's convinced that all this is evidence, and
Hypnosis, it just is so unreliable. I mean, I've mentioned several times before that I love the show Unsolved Mysteries. I've been watching it since the 80s. Every once in a while, I just need background noise. I'll put it on because it's on Amazon Prime. And I'll just listen to it. But every time I get a case, I'm like, wow, this is an interesting case. This is really neat. And then they went to under hypnosis, like, oh, Lord.
Yeah, and when they were done that, they went over to do the polygraph.
Right? Oh, yeah, yeah. Like, they went under a polygraph and under hypnosis. I'm like, what?
But it's okay. Then the alien came in and helped me. Yeah. So the Interrupted Journey was the book. Came out in 1966, which very, very interesting book. I'm pretty confident it's fiction, but it's definitely interesting. It's I think it's worth reading if you're interested in this topic.
I love the 1965 front page story on the Boston Traveler. The headline was great. UFO killer. Did they seize couple? Like they is in capital letters, like all four letters just capitalized. Like, wow.
the original clickbait.
Yeah. Yeah. Only you didn't click, you just picked up the paper.
Well, if you tried to click, maybe it did something. I don't know. We are talking about aliens.
I mean, the click was probably the guy with the change belt.
Right.
That's right.
Go.
There was a movie, was it They Live, that came out many years later. Used they to refer to the aliens. Great underrated movie.
Yeah. Horror movie.
Yeah, not like
great alien horror movie.
not big budget, not well acted. The script wasn't great.
I know.
But
It's terrible. It's a cult classic.
Yeah. But I still thought it was a great movie. Okay, so then we see that in 1969, this would be just about 8 years after the incident, not even, Barney Hill died at 46. Even by the standards of the 60s, that was young.
Yeah. Cerebral hemorrhage.
Very sad. In 1975, a made-for-TV movie came out, the UFO Incident.
Yeah. Which has been described as one of the creepiest movies about aliens ever made.
Well, I imagine if it followed their story, I could see it had some components that might have been disturbing for younger viewers.
Yeah.
I don't know. Creepiest moment I ever had was driving. A few years ago, I was working in a retail store, and it was overnight. I was driving home. It's middle of the night. It's out in New Jersey in the summertime. So cornfields, corn up to, like, I'm driving my truck, my pickup truck. And corn is up to just about eye level with the pickup truck. Moon's up, bright moon. And I had an MP3 player at the time, just loaded up with 100 songs. Because at that point in time, that was a lot that you could put on an MP3 player.
Yeah.
You could put that on a thumb drive nowadays and still have, a couple hundred gig left. But I'm listening to, I'm just chilling out, driving down the road. I stop at a stoplight, just waiting. Light turns green. I start driving. There's no other lights for miles. And just as I'm getting into a groove, the music changes, and it changes onto the X-Files theme song. And I'm just driving down the road like, nope. I didn't want to see an alien come out of the tall grass, out of the cornfield. But it was the creepiest moment of my life.
But that's what you expected. You expected the aliens.
At that point, I did. Like when the X-Files theme song comes on, I expect to see the aliens.
Yeah. There was an effect from, I'm sure this effect has been used in a lot of movies and shows, but I remember it from The Greatest American Hero, which I think was one of the greatest television shows that has ever been made.
Underrated TV show.
Robert Culp is the FBI guy. Perfect.
Believe it or not. I'm walking on air.
That's right. But there was this kind of device they used in the show where I think there was the aliens communicating with, I can't remember the protagonist's name, the hero guy, but the blonde curly hair. And it would switch the radio real quick to make pick words from different stations to make a sentence. And I think other movies, like I said, other media products have used that.
Yeah,
but that's pretty.
They use
creepy.
that in Transformers,
right?
And
that's
the Transformers
Bumblebee.
for Bumblebee. Yeah,
that's right.
On the way over here, the ice cream truck was going around the neighborhood for some reason. So this is like 8:45.
Oh, that's creepy for a whole different reason.
Yeah, well, right, yeah. So this was like 8:45 at night, okay? And trying to put our son to sleep in this ice cream truck, practically blaring this music. And the music's creepy. That's
The Entertainer, maybe? Yeah. That was from the Sting, right? That song that they used, one of them, I think it's from a movie with Robert Redford. And
it was playing,
Newman?
it was, just playing the music they played. But it's 8:45 at night. It's eerie. Right? The music was eerie. And my wife and I kind of look at each other like, why is this guy here so late at night? And B, why is this so creepy? Because it was real silent outside. And so I wasn't really sure what I was going to expect because I knew we were talking about aliens tonight. So I think that was kind of the thing that started into this.
Those were the killer clowns from outer space.
Definitely.
Another underrated, terrible cult classic.
Awful movie.
Awful movie, but
yeah, I think we were set up to talk about aliens tonight.
Yeah.
there was a thing that happened a while ago. There was a big thing with clowns, right? People were afraid of clowns.
Yeah.
That
was when the theatrical release of It. There were people going around dressing as clowns and just standing in creepy places,
right.
Parks and all that.
going out of their way. Yeah. For a while there, the number 3 fear in the United States was said to be clowns. It was like public speaking was number 1, heights was number 2, clowns was number 3.
beat spiders. Wow.
Yeah, beat spiders.
And spider clowns would be. We can't even talk about it.
No, you can't. No. That's killer clowns from outer space.
We've had people stop listening right now because
As soon as you mentioned clowns, people turned off the video. Like, come on, let's get him back. Bring him back. Come on.
It doesn't help that John Wayne Gacy was a clown. I think that
Yeah.
I think the clown union, or I don't know, I think they were probably like, "Oh, you got to be kidding."
as if we needed anything else.
Everything was going along swimmingly until Gacy, and then it was, oh crap, we're done.
All right, so sadly, so now Betty's alone, right? And sadly, her life is quite unfortunate from this point on. She didn't really make a lot of money. She was a celebrity in the UFO community, but had some very bad experiences. And I think these are interesting. They speak to the nature of belief and kind of loyalty to a cause. In 1980, there was one significant incident in New York City. She was giving a presentation at the National UFO Conference, and she had these slides. Not PowerPoint, I imagine at that time, but whatever it was.
You know, they probably were like real actual slides.
Yeah,
with a slide projector. That was a device that
they would get very hot, right?
Very, very hot. Light bulb film projecting an image up onto a screen.
Yeah, so she had these slides that pretty much had the same thing on every slide. It was blurry objects against a dark background. And she described all of them as UFOs. And this is the part that gets me. She was laughed, jeered, and booed off of the stage.
By ufologists.
That talk about, wow. Like, that's a crowd that pretty much believes anything, right? Especially if you say it's a UFO. You could say anything was a UFO. Like, my hand is turned into a UFO right now. They go, oh, that's amazing.
Coming from Betty Hill, too. I mean, like,
yeah.
Really one of the originators of it.
I mean, really a legend. And without her, there's a cornerstone missing. Mm-hmm. Like, to jeer her off the stage.
Right. There's one video, I don't remember like where it's from, but it literally is a trash can lid and a hubcap taped together on a fishing line, and the video is this thing floating around above a house, and there are people. A lot of the ufologists in the community are like, "That's so fake. That's terrible." But there is a part of them. They're like, "That's a UFO. It's a real it's a flying saucer. Look at it. Like, it's a trash can lid. Like, it is clearly a trash can lid and a hubcap." If you look at it, but you know, people.
That's what the government wants you to believe.
Yeah, that's what the government wants you to believe. It's what NASA's trying to trick you into thinking.
I have the answers, and you're wrong.
But it's interesting. Like, people will buy anything, and sometimes things are really close to other things, and they get pulled in. Like we haven't even talked about the outer limits thing. Like 12 days before the first hypnosis session, the outer limits episode comes on. That has an alien with these big eyes and mouth. It's becomes one of the typical images, and then like Barney draws a picture that looks really similar to that at his hypnosis session. Now Betty and Barney said they didn't watch that episode. They watched every other episode of the Outer Limits, but they hadn't seen that one.
Mm-hmm. The episode has become another point that the UFO people are very adamant about. And they say, well, that came out after the incident, which is true. Yeah. But the hypnosis, like all the things I talked about, they revealed hypnosis. Remember, they only had bizarre experiences at first. They crafted their story later.
And Barney, during his hypnosis stuff, he would talk about the eyes. The eyes are boring into my eyes. Like, they're pressing against my eyes. Like, this huge, really big focus on eyes, and then he draws this particular picture. And the episode of the Outer Limits, probably the Bolero shield, the alien in the Bolero shield is very similar to what Barney drew and described. And yeah, they watched every other episode of the Outer Limits, but they didn't see that one before their hypnosis session.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting that like that came out after they said the incident occurred, and people latch onto that, but they forget that the hypnosis, it seems pretty obvious where they got the idea. But in 1995, Betty wrote a self-published book. You always know you're dealing with quality.
With a self-published book.
Self-published, yeah.
And so I thought about self-publishing a book at one point, and I was like, I'm not going to do it.
I don't think it's bad for everybody, but it's frowned upon still.
Yeah. In general, if you self-publish a book, a real publisher is not going to touch you after that. They're going to end up self-publishing everything.
Yeah, the real problem.
It's not a hard and fast rule, but
but it is a rule.
It's a risk.
Yeah, I think what happens is it's not that self-published books are automatically bad because some publisher wouldn't publish your book. There's no editing. It's all the safeguards that come in, like to make sure the book is marketable, that it contains the right content, that the cover, like there's so much to putting a book together. Mm-hmm. But I have seen some okay, especially shorter self-published books, especially from like an expert who's talking about one thing. But yeah, generally they're not great. Hers was not great. In that book, she said that she saw squadrons of UFOs. Mm-hmm. So we went from one frisbee with a Christmas tree, that ran to a Christmas tree, to all these UFOs flying in formation. and a truck levitating above the freeway. The only mention of another vehicle on the road at that time.
Yeah. Another UFO researcher and enthusiast, John Oswald, would go talk to Betty a lot, and they went out at one point, and she would say UFOs and everything.
Right.
He recounted that at one point she said the street light was a UFO.
It's the non-moving type. It's very sneaky. It's been planted here, but I think I can identify it. No, you can't. It's unidentified. Yeah. So Betty would die of cancer on October 17, 2004, at age 85. So she lived a long life.
40 years after.
Yeah, a long time without her husband.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that would be history, right? That they would go into history as the first real abduction story that caught on in any level of the media.
Yeah.
Pretty good title to have. I could live with that title.
I mean, if you go back into the timeline, there's actually a couple of reported ones, I think in Kentucky, like prior to 1961, but they didn't hit the same level of national press, and they didn't get embraced into the ufologist zeitgeist the way Betty and Barney Hill did. And some of the other ones, like Travis Walton, would be embraced, but his would happen years later.
Yeah, and he would have, quote unquote corroboration that, of course, could be very easy to explain. We'll talk about when we get to that episode. But I think theirs is interesting because, not to be mean, but these are just two people driving through the mountains. That's all they can really prove. Mm-hmm. Right? That's the end of the actual evidence. No one disagrees they actually did the drive.
Right.
Everything else is just them saying often two slightly different stories, but trying to keep on one narrative, which is the aliens came down and all that stuff. So it makes me wonder, like in the 60s, people, again, not everything had been invented. And I think that people were very open to the idea this could have happened. And they seemed as believable as anybody else. Yeah. And they went with them.
See, I tend to think that sometimes there is a kernel of truth in things like this. I think that something happened that night. Either Betty had a dream while they were driving, and it was a very vivid one that she then would have again over and over several times. Or there was actually an incident that occurred. I mean, it was 1961. They're out in the sticks in New Hampshire. They stopped at a diner. They're clearly together, an interracial couple. Now, most of their life it wasn't impacted, but all it takes is one person who has a real problem with that to then follow them, to chase them, to have other people with them chasing them, to kind of drive them down a road where they've got other people waiting.
Right, because they were chased.
Yeah,
by
they were chased, and these kinds of motifs, like it's easy for that to be overwhelming, emotionally overwhelming, and overwhelming to cognitively to the point where people repress those memories, and then it takes on like there's an attack, a literal abduction out of their car that is entirely mundane and human,
right?
But something that is traumatic enough that they
dissociative amnesia.
The dissociative amnesia. Yeah. But then, as Betty's recalling the UFO stuff, it become all of the things that the real memories become coded. They become coded in that terminology. It becomes aliens instead of hillbillies, essentially. Which is a possibility, and it's to me a more realistic possibility and probability than they were abducted by actual aliens.
Almost anything would be, right? Yeah.
Of course, it's most likely that it was either a dream or just completely made up.
I saw a comment, kind of to your point, Mike. I saw a comment, I think somebody made a really good point on some video or something. And they say, at some point we're going to see somebody come forward and say, I was there, or a relative of mine was there, and we were chasing these people because they're a mixed race couple, right? And they plan to do something bad to them. And that's what actually happened, and they're just remembering it differently, or we did something really bad, or whatever. So yeah, I mean that makes sense. Anything could have happened there.
Yeah. So this, there are many mental health speculations about this, right? So in the other video I did in this, I think I came down with the theory that the most likely explanation was they were simply lying, which seems impolite, but I think there's no way that's happened. I mean, I guess there's always some chance, right? But realistically, it didn't happen. But I think more generously, you could look at some mental health explanations, and one that's come up a lot is the sleep deprivation, the trauma, like you talked about, Mike, could be a traumatic event that they've reframed, dissociative amnesia, or it could have been Folie. It's called Folie deux, which I think I am mispronouncing, but shared psychotic disorder, which isn't actually a diagnosis in the DSM anymore. It's like I guess you could say a condition of psychosis. Like you could have Folie deux with schizophrenia, you could have it with delusional disorder, brief psychotic disorder, bipolar, whatever. It could just be something that happens. It's a condition that can happen with psychosis. It's not its own disorder, if that makes sense. Right. Like the with panic attack specifier. Mm-hmm. You can add that to anything except panic disorder because that already has. Mm-hmm. So most everybody seems to agree in terms of mental health perspective that Betty had the stronger memories and drive to share the story, which makes me wonder if she wasn't the primary partner. Mm-hmm. And Barney was the secondary partner who was transmitted the delusion, who bought into the delusion. Especially after the hypnosis. Mm-hmm.
I think leading up to the hypnosis, he was still on it's not a thing. And after the hypnosis sessions where Simon probably did a lot of leading. Mm-hmm. And how those new memories formed, that's when he was convinced it absolutely happened. Even though Simon said that he reinstituted the amnesia after every session with the hypnosis.
He hit the button off, right? Hit the button back on.
Right.
Yeah, again, kind of showing confidence way beyond.
Yeah, way beyond the scope of.
Yeah, it was humanly even possible. So one of the most famous cases, I want to touch on this briefly because I think it has some components that don't involve aliens, but it does seem very similar to what happened. There's a famous case in New Zealand of Folie deux, shared psychotic disorder. It was Heavenly Creatures, I think, was a movie that was made about. I don't think it was a good movie, but it was about this topic. It was. I'm sure I'm pronouncing some of this wrong. Pauline Parker, I think I pronounced that right, and Juliet Hume.
Hume,
something like
Hume
that.
Or something like that. It's Hulme.
Yeah. So they were teens in New Zealand, and they committed a homicide, and they had a huge investment in fantasy. So it's a big long story, but you see the components. You see they had their own. They were isolated. They're on their own. They had massive amounts of fantasy. We see that Betty and Barney, as an interracial couple, maybe felt somewhat isolated, even though people accepted them. They might have felt like, okay, we're in this together, and they're going to keep their ideas between them. A lot of their
right.
And of course, they ended up committing a crime, in New Zealand, and Betty and Barney did not. But either way, again, you see this kind of fantastical story that's built up. The girls in New Zealand had a tremendous story, had a lot of components to it, very complex. Their own, like everything. They invented their own everything, way of communicating and everything. So another case of Folie deux is very famous is the Slender Man.
Oh, yeah.
Fortunately, that was not a homicide. It was a terrible attempted murder.
It was an attempted homicide, but ultimately no one died in that case, which is amazing.
Yeah. That girl survived that is a hero. She was incredible. She was almost killed, like very close to being killed. But you had two, I forget their ages. I think they all might have been 12.
Yeah, they were just preteen,
mm-hmm.
I think.
And two, in theory, the ones that had Folie deux stabbed a third. And that's unheard of for.
Yeah, we should definitely cover that.
Yeah. Well, that has the whole, the Slender Man, and then, just some incredible components. The girls were lucky; they survived. They kind of walked off to this where they thought they would visit the Slender Man or live with him. They could have been, anything could happen to them. Like it was,
right.
Yeah. And of course, they tried to kill somebody. I believe one of them is now released. I think the other one might still be in a mental institution of some type. I'm not sure, but we'll add that case to the. That would be the murder part because it was attempted murder.
Yeah.
Although you could also put it
either.
You could put it. Yeah.
Could be either.
Yeah. So yeah, some interesting cases. Folio deux is something we can revisit. It's
pretty sure we couldn't put that in the movie part.
there's no movie yet. I don't think.
No movie on that. Yeah. I mean, I think there is a Slender Man movie, but it's not about that. It's a completely different thing.
The interesting thing is,
I'm sorry. I was just going to say. I remember when that Slender Man stuff came out, and just how much parents were intrigued, but like scared about it, about the effect it might have on their children. Just these videos come up on YouTube or wherever about Slender Man, and have these theories behind it about Slender Man's going to come and get you and things like that. That was a really scary thing for a lot of parents who didn't really understand at the time the effect that video games and media and things would have on their kids. And so that was a pretty big deal. So Slender Man really came onto the scene, from my perspective, very quickly and very intensely too, and had a lot of very negative effects on kids, and maybe society as a whole.
Yeah, I think that there's two different things. I think what you might be more referring to, I think, is the Momo.
Yeah,
thing.
You're right.
Right?
Yep.
Slender Man kind of was a very slow build up, a creepypasta thing from Tumblr and Reddit days. Like it was. It was really a Photoshop contest kind of thing.
Sure.
Like it was very slow to build up because it was just like put Slender Man in the back of a photo to make it more creepy. Put this really tall, faceless person in the back of these photos to make them more creepy. And then they just kind of spread out and it became much more big. And because more people would be like, wow, it's really creepy. What is that? And then it got a following that pulled up, but Momo is one of those kinds of things where there's one of those stories that came out. It's like if your kids are watching this video, and Momo's going to come out and brainwash them into killing somebody or something like that.
Similar. It was similar.
You got to be careful. It was kind of I think that was kind of falls back into the moral panic kind of mindset of like got to make sure your kids are virtuous and following the rules and setting standards and things like that, or the devil's going to get them.
Yeah, they're both. I think there's a moral panic component. I think, interestingly, Slender Man, though, really played into the particular sensitivities of one of those girls, the primary, again, theoretically, the primary partner, if it was shared psychotic disorder, in that, they take the kid and they run off and stuff. Like it's, but, Slender Man is creepy, like the images that were generated of him. But he's always reminded me of somebody who had like a set of long johns and they forgot to put holes in them. So it's like it's over his head, it's over his hands. Like, what did I do here? He's just confused. He just needs help. He needs scissors. Is what he needs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just needs to visit a tailor.
It's like you need holes so you can put your head in, and what are you doing? Like, I guess he's not a seamstress or whatever. What's a male who does that?
Good question.
Tailor.
Yeah. Is seamstress referred to a gender? Is that?
I think it is. I think it is gendered.
Okay.
I'd have to ask my sister. She'd know.
Okay. Yeah.
She does all sorts of costuming stuff, historical costuming and historical clothing stuff. She really loves. So I'd have to ask her, but I think that's the two terms: seamstress and tailor.
Tailor. Okay. So he needs one or the other to help him out. So either way, Folio deux I think is real, and we have a few cases we can bring up on murder part or alien lizard humanoids and look at that. Any final thoughts here for the case of Betty and Barney?
Jeff, go ahead.
So I got a few thoughts, a few things I wanted to bring up. First off, have you guys ever gone on to the NICAP website?
I've never been on.
I actually haven't. No.
So it's great. I highly recommend it. So National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomenon. Now this came up. We talked about this earlier. They had what was referred to as Project Blue Book. Project of the Air Force took place from 1947, 1969 to collect and investigate reports of sightings, or things that couldn't explain. So it ended in 69, and the report, they had 12,618 sightings, 701 of which were unidentified. And they said, essentially, no evidence or indication of advanced technology or that there's a threat to national security. We saw a very, very similar thing June of this year when the Department of Defense Department of Defense's Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon Task Force came out with a report from November 2004 to March 2021, said pretty much the same thing. We have a list of sightings. Some are unidentified, but we have no conclusion, essentially. So I thought that was interesting. But
when there's no evidence, it's really hard to come to a conclusion.
Well, yeah, essentially, there's no evidence. We have no conclusion. We're not telling you anything because we have nothing. So the NICAP website, pretty basic as far as modern websites go. But there's a part on there. It's called the Chronos, and you can click on this, and they have a directory from 1900 all the way to current of UFO or just sightings in general, and pretty awesome. I recommend it. Some of them are very detailed, and you're like, this is amazing. There's other websites. One that I found, alientechnology.com. They have people can just post sightings or whatever they might see on there, and so I recommend that one even more because these stories are like some of them are incredibly funny. So if you're looking for anything funny, you're just wasting time, I recommend that. But I wanted to talk about some more modern things that people are doing, sightings and things like that. So the one, it was actually a Joe Rogan interview that I watched. It was a Navy commander named David Fravor, and pretty interesting. It was a Tic Tac UFO encounter, and you get to see what it was a Navy pilot, and they have a recording of something they picked up on the radar, and it unidentified, and they talked about how quickly it moved and how it didn't have a tail like you would expect from the heat signature, like with a plane or a helicopter, or something like that. And so you're able to see, it was pretty cool. You're able to see the radar image that they would have seen when they were in the plane. So they talked about it. Really interesting. So, I mean, if a lot of skeptical people looking at that, a lot of believers in unidentified objects looking at that. So that one was interesting. I thought that was really cool to watch. I can also make a connection kind of to music here as well. You guys familiar with the band Blink-182?
Yeah.
So 90s, 2000s band.
Oh, yeah.
The former guitarist and vocalist, Tom DeLonge, is now a big name in UFO research, sightings, all that kind of stuff. And so, and it should be said too that when he was in the band, when they were touring, he would send people out on Bigfoot searches. So, that's probably the icing on the cake. But so he went as far to start a company called To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences. Runs a website called Stranger Times. The interesting thing, though, is that he works with some big name people in this research field, and he would talk about how he's had these meetings with high level people in the government concerning UFOs and concerning extraterrestrial kind of stuff, And so there's a lot that he just says I can't talk about, and you're like, well, why not? He's like, well, I represent more than myself, and I can't get into details, stuff that I've pieced together that not many other people were able to. But his company was able to release some videos that the government would release a few years later. The videos much like what we would see with the commander David Fravor. And so that's interesting. His company was able to, in part, kind of give some pressure perhaps to the government to look more into this, and to develop committees and things like that. So they're putting a lot of money into this research about aliens, UFOs. They don't call them UFOs. What do they call them now?
UAPs.
UAPs, yeah. So they're putting a lot of money into research about stuff like this. So it certainly seems like this is growing, right? There's kind of big companies and big names that are putting money and time into this. So it's if you're a skeptic or a UFOologist or even just somebody who thinks that they're out there, pretty good time to be alive. There's a lot of interest in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting. I did a couple of videos about Fravor, and very upstanding, credible witness. I mean, one of the few, I guess you could argue, right? Naval officer, and there were other naval officers with him. One in the Super Hornet that he was in, the F-18, and then another one, two others in another plane. So two of them, Fravor and another pilot, were on 60 Minutes not that long ago.
Right.
I think I did a video about that as well. So, yeah, I mean, their information is included in the report that came out, which we should talk about in one video one time. Of course, there's not much in the report. It's like
There's not much to talk about.
Yeah.
Jeff just pretty much covered the whole thing.
Yeah,
basically,
that was
yeah.
the summary.
That's the summary, everything. Like,
Yeah, we don't know.
we don't know.
Well,
There's
they
no
did-
evidence.
they did clear up
There's
one.
no evidence. Yeah, I think there was one. They were like, we know what this is. Everything else, there's
a
no
balloon
evidence.
or something, right? Some big balloon or something. Yeah.
Everything else, there's no evidence. We can draw no conclusion.
Yeah, so it's it's kind of a mystery.
Just ufologists, I'm sure, are having a field day with.
Well, you think about like the UFO people. Fravor has to be their hero, whether he wants to be or not. Has to be. Like here, you have a government, not an official, but a military officer, a naval aviator. That's a very high level of training and trust. He's in I don't know how much an F-18 costs, but it's a lot.
Millions.
Yeah,
Millions.
it's a huge technical piece of equipment that has lethal capabilities. And he's saying, I don't know, that was not an airplane. Like basically, that's kind of his story. Is like it was something and it can't be identified, and it could be an alien. I don't think he's committed to that, but he certainly is saying it wasn't anything. It could have been, not like an airplane or weather balloon or a goose or debris or whatever. So yeah, that's pretty neat. I'll have to check out the NICAP. I'll have to check that out. The
Yeah.
stories.
Well, I think it's well worth it. Yeah. Lots of directions you can go on that website.
We could make episodes forever. What are your thoughts, Mike?
Whenever anybody says alien abduction, I tend to just roll my eyes just because, again, I'm skeptical in that I see no physical evidence. Eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable, and especially when you start adding in hypnosis into the mix,
Sleep
that makes
paralysis.
it even worse. Yeah, sleep paralysis and hypnosis and just the Betty and Barney Hill case actually became a template, pretty much, for like everything else that followed. Like a lot of other alien abduction stories follow the same template, especially with the lassitude and the euphoric effect or the sleepy effect that they had, and it's almost always the case. Like a person's taken out and they feel like they're kind of disembodied. They have this play, but that's like I felt that when I'm like on the edge of sleep. Mm-hmm. It's a common feeling. Mm-hmm. It's something a lot of people can get behind and have felt in their life. So people can identify with it. And so people identify with this story and they get into it. And very often we can find some very mundane explanations behind things, like the suggestibility of just being on that edge of sleep with the TV on in the other room.
Or
And
people
hearing
walking around, or
people walking around talking. If TV's on in the other room, somebody's watching it. Somebody's watching Fire in the Sky about Travis Walton case, and you're laying in bed with the door open and just on the edge of sleep, and your dreams become about being abducted by aliens. And then because it's so vivid and so real, because you were kind of just on the edge of sleep, it becomes tagged by your brain as emotionally impactful and saved, instead of being tossed like regular dreams. Most of the time when you dream, you wake up the next morning, you're like, I had the weirdest dream. Damn, I don't remember what it was about. But most of our dreams get tossed because they're superfluous data that the brain realizes isn't necessary. But when they're emotionally driven, like highly emotionally driven, they get tagged to be kept by the lower brain, by parts of the brain like the amygdala, because it tags it. That was dangerous. Like, we got to remember that. And so it keeps that memory, and then we become more vivid dreams, and we have those dreams over and over again. So to me, they're all kind of like, there's a mundane explanation for things. I've had my own UFO experience. I think I was like 15 or 16, and my dad and I were outside and noticed a movement up in the sky. Clear blue sky, no clouds. I think, well, maybe like one or two little fluffy clouds. And we saw this green little tiny object up in the sky, zipping around in like just really quickly in random directions, up, down, left, right, like just randomly, like, what the hell is it? So my dad goes, "You keep an eye on it. I'll be right back." He comes back with his binoculars, and each lens was like this big around at the far end. So he's got these ginormous binoculars, and like of course he's got the sight finder. So like, where is it? I'm like, it's right over there, and he brings it up, sights it in, puts the binoculars up to his eyes, turns, and goes, "Huh." I'm like, "What?" He hands me the binoculars and points. It was a hummingbird at about 500 feet. Those hummingbirds can make those kinds of really quick. Rapid turns and changes of direction. And since it was a bright reflective green, bright sunny day, we got the reflection of it just because we were at the right angle. But until we got a good look at it through the binoculars, it was a UFO. It was an unidentified flying object. It would be classified as an unidentified aerial phenomena today. But we were able to identify it. I have had a UFO, but that's what brings me to that conclusion. There's a rational, reasonable explanation behind all of these things.
Yeah, all of them. I agree. Only later would you discover the strap was broken on those binoculars.
Right, the binocular strap's broken. The hummingbird had abducted us. Used its beak for the anal probe.
And it was wearing a hat.
It was a
beret.
It was a beret, right? It was wearing a blue or black.
Blue or black could have been.
Right.
It wasn't red. Definitely wasn't red. Because it survived the encounter.
It may or may not have been wearing glasses.
The big mustache.
So my final thoughts on this case. The UFO people are a community, right? It's like professional wrestling.
Or ancient alien
Is that?
Or ancient alien theorists.
Right, yeah. If you look at like professional wrestling, I'm doing research now for a Andre the Giant video. Right, he was amazing.
Oh, he was amazing, especially in The Princess Bride.
Well, yeah, as an actor, but also as a as a wrestler.
As a wrestler, he was great in general as a person.
We had the rivalry with Hulk Hogan and all this stuff. And when you're reading about this stuff, like we all know that was pretend. And some of the mysteries are, did the producers really know who was going to win, or did they leave it up to the talent, or whatever? Maybe sometimes they did, but pretty much it was scripted, probably for safety reasons, if nothing else, right? Especially with a 500-pound, Andre the Giant was like 500 pounds. And he did hurt some people by accident, with falling on them and stuff like that. But, people get into pro wrestling, it's real to them. Like the villain and the hero, like it's theater. And I look at the UFO thing as kind of the same way. I think a lot of people have to know that there's no aliens flying around the atmosphere and, and green lights and beaming people up. They're just not.
I wish. I
wish
wish transporters existed. That'd be great.
Yeah. But I think that it gives somebody something to do. Like it's recreation, and they just don't care. And that's kind of how I look at especially Betty Hill, because she had a longer career, if you will. I remember years ago, there was a television show that had a big impact on me called Buck Rogers in the 25th Century.
Oh, Buck Rogers was great.
It premiered when I happened to be in San Diego, California, visiting grandmother and our grandparents at that time. I think they were both alive then. And it was, it was like nothing else. I think it's like 1979. And Gil Gerard was Buck Rogers, and Aaron Gray, who would go on to like Silver Spoons, a TV show later on, was Wilma something. Name Colonel Wilma something. I can't remember the last name, but either way, those are the two big characters. And I really love the series, of course, like any sci-fi series of that time, like Battlestar Galactica.
Deering,
yes.
Colonel Wilma Deering.
That's right, Wilma Deering. So like any sci-fi show at the time, big budget, couldn't last on TV. TV just couldn't handle those, again, Battlestar Galactica, other shows as well. So years later, many years later, on social media, I think probably 2 or 3 years ago, I was on the internet looking at videos. I found a video of Gil Gerard, one video, and another video of Aaron Gray at one of these conferences. I don't know much about I've never really been to any of them, but like enthusiasts of like comic books.
Conventions, yeah. Comic book and Star Trek and sci-fi conventions.
Yeah, so there'll be like actors from Star Trek or Star Wars or any number of other products will be there signing like Gil Gerard would have Buck Rogers like when he was young, and Aaron Gray would have like Wilma Deering when she was young. And I think, what a great way to make a living. It was a show that ran for I don't know how many seasons back in Two or three. Two.
Total of 32 episodes.
Yeah, not a hit.
Right.
But they still have a community. Like, I was interested. Mm-hmm. Like, I was like, this is great. Like, good for them. They're still, I don't know how much they charge for every photo and how much they get, but whatever. It's part of their legacy.
Buck Rogers goes way back.
Well, yeah, way back before
way
that.
back. Yeah. The serial movies in the 30s and 40s.
Oh, he definitely wasn't the first.
Yeah,
right?
no.
Yeah.
No, Gil Gerard was not the first Buck Rogers. I have understanding that they're going to be doing another Buck Rogers series soon.
I hope they give him a role. I know it would be a different role because of his age, but an older officer on the ship or something.
I know they're trying to bring back Flash Gordon.
Yeah, another great.
Another iteration of Flash Gordon, because they tried to do it a few years ago on the Sci-Fi Channel. But I think Netflix is working on a new Flash Gordon series. One of the streaming services.
They threw some big money at the sci-fi stuff. Yeah. So either way, that's kind of how I look at Betty Hill. And except I think Gil Gerard and Aaron Gray had a positive outcome. Talent. Yeah, they were actually very good actors. But, Betty Hill, she was part of that community. I think everybody knew it wasn't true, or they should have. But she would sign stuff. She would do presentations. And sadly, as I mentioned, she kind of fell out of favor, which is not a risk of, for Gil Gerard or Aaron Gray or anybody like them. I mean, you acted, and now you're just signing stuff. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. But I view it like theater, and I think in the end I kind of feel sorry for Barney and Betty. They had their story. They weren't really hurting anybody through their deception or their delusion, whatever it was, and they kind of built a little career, especially her. And it didn't work out. Mm-hmm. The UFO people rejected her.
Ultimately, yeah.
For calling everything UFOs.
Yeah, everything. It's a salt shaker, Betty. It's just a salt shaker.
Yeah, it's a shame to be rejected by any community, especially one that you are a part of, but especially one that, as you said before, Dr. Grande, especially one that is kind of based on fantasy. I mean, they believe that they've seen these things, but at the same time, there's a lot of unknowns there, and maybe these things are out there, and maybe we'll find proof, and maybe there's all these crazy things going on out there. So for somebody to present ideas to be rejected by that kind of community is pretty significant, and that would probably give someone a pretty big hit to I don't know, everything they've invested into it. Yeah, just their personality, their sense of being in general.
Yeah, there's just something very awkward about the UFO people denying something's a UFO. Like, take the alien lizard humanoid. Like, you see somebody believes in that, and they're like, well, Bill Clinton was an alien lizard humanoid, and Donald Trump was an alien lizard, whoever, like, on and on. And then they say, well, Joe Biden is too. What? Oh, that just goes too far. There's no way he's an alien. Like, what? You believe everybody's an alien?
Everybody's an alien, but not Joe.
It's like, it's almost like criticizing her as a UFO person seems hysterical to me. But either way. So that is the case of Betty and Barney Hill, the incident in 1961. An amazing case, an important case for the UFO people. Please put any thoughts and comments in the comments section. We read them. We appreciate them. They give us ideas of how to make improvements and other topics to look at. I know we generated quite a few topics here. We can look at other stories like Travis Walton. We'll take a look at in the future. So again, please put anything that you're thinking in the comments. We appreciate it. We will be back soon with another episode of Alien Lizard Humanoids and, of course, the murder part and other series we're doing. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon.